And welcome to this evening's study session of the City Council. Agendas for study sessions, including concept reviews, can be found by visiting Broomfield's website at broomfield.org. Our agenda this evening includes 2 study session items. Seeing there are no concept reviews on the agenda this evening, there will not be any public comment. The study session will be televised on Channel 8 and through live streaming on Broomfield's website, broomfield.org. Our agenda this evening, for our hearing impaired residents present, we have wireless headsets available through our AV team in the back of the council chambers. Our first agenda item this evening is a sustainability update on strategies to reduce residential waste in landfills, including a universal collection program and a residential recycling ordinance. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, which I'll ask our staff to begin the discussion.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, council and community. Danae Brouillard, our Director of Strategic Initiatives, is going to kick us off, and then Allison Harvey, our Deputy Director, is going to walk us through the plan. Ms. Brouillard.
Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. Danae Brouillard, Director of Strategic Initiatives and Governmental Affairs. Although I will say after today, maybe I'm thinking about dropping that second half of the title. This evening, I'm joined by the amazing sustainability team, as well as representatives from several departments that have been critical in this endeavor, including Public Works, Legal, Finance, GIS, and Communications. I just want to take a moment and say that we are incredibly grateful to everyone that has helped us, as it has been one of collaboration and great effort. Before we dive into the presentation and details, I did want to take a moment and set some expectations for the conversation tonight, as well as the direction staff is seeking. It is important to note that we recognize there are many trade-offs involved in each decision point that we have before you, and we understand that it is incredibly complex. Next slide. For tonight's conversation, we will be discussing high impact strategies to reduce residential waste in landfills, specifically universal collection and a community recycling and compost ordinance. We recognize that the strategies being discussed tonight do not address commercial waste diversion. As you can see from the memo, addressing residential waste is already a heavy lift, and to do both well, we need a phased approach. So therefore, we are not presenting strategies for commercial waste diversion this evening. We have planned for this presentation to be interactive, as there are several decision points that staff is seeking direction on from council, beginning with the 3 pathways. Pending council's direction, there will be subsequent decisions as well. Next slide. The foundation for the conversation this evening are the ambitious greenhouse gas reduction targets and zero waste goals council set. We would be remiss to not address these and provide updates, including an overview of zero waste in the context of climate change and emissions. Both of these areas have solid action plans, which were finalized in 2022, and we are working across the organization to embed the plans into the budget and planning process to ensure adequate staffing and resources as we move forward on the other strategies. You'll begin to see these various requests in the 2024 budget proposals later this year. Allison Harvey, Deputy Director, will now provide a brief update on the progress towards each of these goals.
Good evening, everyone. So in 2020, Council set these ambitious targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions community-wide and for moving towards zero waste. And it's a little bit confusing because on the one hand, we're reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, and then on the zero waste, we're trying to increase our diversion rate. But what we wanted to just do at the start of tonight is put our conversations about residential waste diversion in the context of all of the sustainability goals. We have a couple of targets coming close in 2025. That's when we're due to destined is definitely not the right word because it won't happen with destiny. By design, we are hoping to hit a 26% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2025. And that is also the year that the goal is set to have a 50% diversion rate. So 50% recycling and compost rather than going into landfill. The good news is that we are on track to hit the greenhouse gas reduction goal of 26% by 2025. We're not going in deep on that today. That progress update is courtesy of a 2021 GHG inventory we've done. And we're going to come back to you with a more detailed report on progress when we have the 2022 data available for analysis. There's still a few things we're waiting on to finalize. And at that point, we'll have 3 data points we can look at: 2017 baseline, 2021, and 2022. And we'll have a better sense of where we're heading for those goals that are coming in 2030 and 2050. Now, tonight's focus is related to the zero waste goals, but it was important to situate those in the context of the GHG targets, because you probably have heard a discussion about waste diversion as a way of addressing climate change at the local level. So we did want to point out that according to our 2022, the 2021 GHG inventory, solid waste contributes less than 5% to Broomfield's overall emissions. And in fact, if all of the zero waste initiatives in the action plan laid out, if we implemented them all to the fullest extent, we expect about a 2% reduction in GHG emissions. So the zero waste goals have a really important effect on their own for environment and health. And it is a meaningful progression towards GHG reduction, but it's not the thing that's going to get us to that diversion. And we just wanted to make sure everybody was really clear on that. It is one of the initiatives where we have the most potential for local control. And so we're excited to be bringing you options on this front tonight. Next slide, please. That's going to be loud. Sorry about that. So the zero waste goals. We are hoping to hit 50% by 2025 and 100% or darn near by 2035, which is coming, like, it's very soon. According to our 2021 data, we are at a 22% diversion rate, producing about 69,000 tons of waste. And so that means 78% of it went to landfill. We know we need to do better. We're doing better than the state average, which is only 16%, but the national average for diversion is 32%. So that's why we're here tonight, talking about the incremental steps that we can be taking to help meet those goals. If it's not clear from the slide, we're not on track to meet that 2025 goal. Even the things we're talking about tonight, it will move us in the direction, but it's looking unlikely that we will hit that target. I wanted to just take a little sidebar about where does our waste diversion data come from, because I think it's important for you to understand a little bit about that as we talk about the estimated impact of the initiatives we're looking at tonight. Mostly I wanted to say, people who like data, and all of us, when we're trying to use data in our decisions, we like it to be sound and well-founded and precise. And our waste data is not precise. It's not like electricity that gets metered at your house and we know exactly how much electricity or water each household is using. There's no one weighing your trash when you put it outside in your bin, at least not that we know of. The trucks run routes, they might go through multiple cities, and then the haulers, they know the number of contracts they have along the route. When they get to the end, they weigh their truck. They know what proportion of contracts were in Broomfield, what proportion were in Lafayette, what proportion were in Erie, and then they do some basic math to estimate the diversion per household and per community, and that's where our data comes from. We rely on the goodwill of the haulers to report this. We require it in our licensing, but how they do it is up to them, and they use a variety of strategies, and sometimes there can be, an error in the formula in the spreadsheet can lead to unusual outcomes. And so you will hear us adjusting things retroactively sometimes, and it's because of that. It's the data, it is changing often. And the more we work with it, the more comfortable we get, and we say, that doesn't look right. And then, in fact, that's happened with the 2022 data, that one of our staff contacted a hauler and they said, oh yeah, there was an error in our spreadsheet and it wasn't that many tonnages that we sent for Broomfield. So we're doing our best. These are the best numbers we have to estimate our diversion impact and to help with decision making. And we thought it was important just that they're not airtight. So there's quite a large margin of error, and we're talking about small incremental changes. So we have to be comfortable with some discomfort there. I'll hand it back to Danae.
Thank you. So now that we've set the foundation for tonight's conversation, we will move on to the pathways, as this is the key direction needed from council tonight. Next slide. We recognize that this may be the first time that you have seen the narrowed focus on residential aspects of the zero waste initiatives. The action plan does not separate out residential from commercial necessarily, so the numbers may not be what you are expecting in regards to waste diversion impact. Additionally, the action plan identifies staffing and budget needs, but it was limited to the drafting and designing of the plans and strategies. It did not capture implementation costs because at the time they did not have enough detail to make that estimate. We have now provided the details and therefore are able to provide a more accurate estimate of the fiscal impact, both for startup costs as well as ongoing operational costs. For example, the action plan highlighted $100,000 to hire a consultant to write the RFP, but it did not recognize any ongoing expenses to the organization for the maintenance and continuation of the program. As you can see in this chart, we've highlighted the various pathways and focused on the financial considerations and then the estimated range of impact on diversion. And I know the estimated range is not always fun, but as Allison said, the numbers are really hard to dial in and we don't want to overpromise because we've done that before and had to walk back. So we're trying to be very transparent in what we do know and what we can capture. We know that the decisions are not as simple as this chart makes it look, but we felt that a summary may be helpful. It's important to note a couple of additional things related to the financial considerations. First off, the staffing levels proposed are consistent with what other municipalities have implemented to do this well. We want to be mindful of the staffing needed to do this successfully and to meet the customer service expectations of Broomfield residents, if that is the direction of council. For context or comparison, Golden has one ongoing FTE and their population is about 20,000. Staff made some assumptions in the drafting of the financial note that we wanted to highlight tonight as well. For the city contract pathway option, which is pathway 1 and included in pathway 3, we assumed that the hauler would manage the billing. So we did not ask for additional FTE for the billing management. We also assumed that the city contract would include compost services at some level, which would require more FTE to manage those aspects of the contract. This will be a decision point for council later this evening. The third assumption is that we also provided the financial impact with the assumption that the HOAs would be included. The reasons we use these specific assumptions in drafting these estimated financial impacts for the pathways was they're consistent with the recommendations, and we wanted to be as transparent as possible on the financial implications for each pathway. A very important note on the financial impact is that at this time, we are not able to quantify the potential cost savings or additional revenue sources, but recognize that there could be some. So examples of that could be grants, administrative fees, street maintenance cost savings, and even potential dollars from the state extended producer responsibility program. For example, the cost of the spring cleanup this year alone was nearly $500,000. This may be something where we could take some of the services and incorporate it into a city contract, which could have savings that aren't necessarily captured in this fiscal note, but we aren't able to capture it accurately, so we weren't able to put it in there. The hard reality is to meet these zero waste goals, there's a financial investment needed on both operations and staffing. Now that we've addressed maybe the potential sticker shock or surprises with the numbers as presented, we'll summarize the 3 pathways. So pathway 1, as you can see up here, is to implement a universal waste collection program or a city contracted waste removal service. And this would be for single family residents and multifamily units with 7 or less. It would include volume-based pricing. The second pathway is to adopt a residential recycling ordinance, which requires licensed haulers to offer recycling services with trash removal at no additional cost, and it would implement volume-based pricing as well. And then pathway 3 is to do both pathway 1 and pathway 2, as I just outlined, which is what was envisioned in the zero waste plan. Looking at all the information in hand, staff, ACES, and EcoCycle agreed that the best way to accelerate progress towards our zero waste goals in the residential sector, as well as improve equity of access, is pathway 3. We've planned a deep dive on each pathway tonight, and we did a deep dive in the memo. And we're prepared to walk through what each one looks like, the implementation timelines, benefits, drawbacks, and trade-offs, as well as the financial considerations in depth for each, but we wanted to start with a high-level overview. Before we do a deep dive, we want to pause and just gauge what is the most productive way for us to proceed tonight to ensure that staff receives direction regarding which pathway council wants us to take and the subsequent decision points. Our understanding is that in the past, council desired pathway 3, which is the combined city contracted services and recycling ordinance, and again, what was envisioned in the zero waste plan when it was originally proposed and shared and reviewed. So I'm going to look at the mayor to help me here a little bit, but we're looking at if council would like us to continue with a deep dive of each pathway, or if you feel prepared to provide direction on a pathway at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Brouillard and Ms. Harvey. We will ask council if you're finished with your presentation. Sound good?
Yeah, at this point, yeah, we'll open it up and then we'll adjust based on your direction.
All right, and thank you for everything. I know you've been at the Capitol since the wee hours and you wear a lot of hats. And I just want you to know how appreciated you are. And along with y'all too. So we'll start with Councilmember Marshall Olson.
Thank you, Mayor. So I am definitely leaning towards number 3. I do have some questions though, specifically related to the costs. You said that the FTE level, that doesn't include any savings that we might have. So are we envisioning that some of that might, like there might be administrative fees on the bills that are borne by the consumers? Is that kind of one funding mechanism that we're thinking about?
Yes, an administrative fee is one mechanism we would look at. And typically the other cities that have introduced that have a fee study that they do, but it's hard to do the fee study until you get some pricing through the RFP.
How much of that also could be borne by the opt-out fee? Do we have any idea of how many opt-out fees we would have?
So again, other cities who have introduced an opt-out fee equivalent to the minimum level of service have about a 97% participation rate, which doesn't lead to a ton of revenue, but it leads to great participation.
And then on this one subject, you mentioned the large item pickup, which we just approved for $500,000. So we're thinking that that would be kind of rolled into the cost of the program, whereas right now it's come out of general fund, but it would come out of the consumer fees. Is that what I'm hearing?
So we want to be careful not to promise that it would be included. It was something we would pursue through the RFP process. Again, other cities who have recently gone through this process have been able to include a bulky item pickup twice, 2 per year per household is what they got in Fort Collins. It depends on the hauler and it does impact the overall price, but we do see potential to include some non-curbside services for residents in this contract that then we might be able to reduce some of the other programs.
So theoretically, it's going to cost us $700,000 plus an ongoing. Can you put that slide back up? The cost. All right. Or I have it on
Slide 5.
I have it in my
Curtis.
memo probably.
It was slide 5.
So theoretically, 200,000 on ongoing, but we're potentially saving 500,000 on the potentially, obviously. Yeah.
Potentially saving some of that.
Potentially.
I got it.
This is what, I think the important thing is it wouldn't replace the whole program. So there are components that we could entwine into the
Okay.
contract that we would explore. But this is where the decision points from you all tonight will be very important so that we can take that next step of exploring what that would look like at that point.
Could you explain so $208,000, that's per year for 2 FTEs, right? And the 728, is that for the entire 3-year ramp up?
Yeah.
Was that per year?
Thanks to finance, we use a $104,000 estimate for staffing based off of benefits and what it can cost. And we know it could be higher or lower. It's just an estimate. And so what we wanted to do is call it out because as you can see, the initial start out is much larger than the ongoing costs. So the initial 728,000 would then decrease down. Is that right? Am I speaking that right? Now that
Do
I'm
you
saying it
want
out loud. Yeah, let me.
I'll walk you
So
We have a whole sheet of
right.
this.
So I guess my question is the 720, so the 208 is per year, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Is the 728 per year or is that the total cost from 23 to 26?
It's the total cost
Okay.
from 23 to 26 with a phased in hiring of those 3 FTE equivalents.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. That's the only question I have at this stage, and I am in support of option 3.
Noted. Thank you, Councilmember. Who would like to go next? Councilmember Cohen.
I just had a couple of quick questions on your memo, which was very good. So thank you for tremendous amount of detail. On option 3, there's a reference to HOAs can opt out. Do they pay an opt-out fee per resident?
So if HOAs are allowed to opt out, They don't pay an opt-out fee, but the individual residents within that HOA would pay an opt-out fee.
So every HOA resident, if the HOA decides, is that how it works?
Attorney Rogers, I'm looking at you for clarification on how the opt-out fee only applies to individuals and does not apply to HOAs. Can you speak to that just a little bit?
I can in a second, but I want to make sure I'm understanding the question right. You were asking if the HOA votes to opt out, that applies for the entire HOA, but the individuals,
If I understand correctly, under 3, we have the opt-out, which obviously is an incentive to participate. But it says HOAs can opt out.
Mhm.
So is that the entity, meaning Broadlands HOA 1 can vote, their board can vote and say, no, we're keeping ours. But that means every resident in that HOA has to pay the opt-out fee,
yes,
right?
that would, well, that's definitely how the HOA vote would work, that it would be.
So these
on the
decisions
board.
would be, every HOA would have to make a decision on whether to opt in and out, and that's how that would be decided for folks.
Yes, yes,
Right.
and how they make that decision and how much input they get from their owners depends on their covenants.
Okay, and every non-HOA residents or people in HOAs who don't have trash service, it's an individual decision.
Yes.
Thank you. I also wanted curious that it was interesting in your survey, there's a lot of support. And I don't know, you probably haven't gotten that far. The cities that have like Lafayette and Louisville who had this, have they done surveys and what the level of satisfaction is after adoption?
Yes, I'd like to say one more thing about the opt-out fee,
Mhm.
if that's all right to help.
Sure.
Part of it is that when a hauler bids, they're bidding on a certain number of contracts. And to be able to provide the efficiencies, the route efficiencies and economies of scale, they need to be guaranteed that number of contracts. And so the opt-out fee, the individual opt-out fee actually goes to the hauler. So my understanding is there is some room if there's negotiations with HOAs ahead of the contracting process and the RFP. It's not necessarily the case that the individuals in the HOA would have to pay the opt-out fee, but we would have to come back to you on that.
And
Is that-
well, I'm curious, I guess to follow on that question, I assume these cities have HOAs. I mean, Colorado has what, #2 in the nation in HOAs or something like that. I don't know why, but how did that work out with Louisville? And I mean, what was their experience in navigating the HOA problem?
So as far as we are aware, the other cities have not required HOAs to participate. And what we hear from our colleagues in those municipalities is that they wish they had, because it becomes very difficult to roll them in later. And there is a point in time decision that typically needs to be made before contracting, because the hauler can't just suddenly absorb 400 homes, or depending on the size of the HOA halfway through. The hauler needs some kind of indication of when things will phase in or not. And when we talked about trade-offs, and I think what other cities have found is that the point of inclusion around the HOAs, it has affected their ability to get things over the line sometimes.
So in your sequence 3, you say we don't force them in.
To clarify, the path 3 recommendation is that HOAs would be allowed to participate in the city contract if they wanted to. And they would also be allowed to opt out, providing that they contract for the same level of service, which would be using the volume-based pricing and bundled trash and recycling services.
So it's possible some of the HOAs would have to renegotiate their contracts if they chose either not to participate, either they could either join the city. If they stay out of the city, they may have to renegotiate depending on the level of service they already have, which it sounds like a few would have to change. Most of them are sort of already provide recycling and all that.
Yes, and in Fort Collins, when they introduced that, they left a pretty long lead ramp so that no HOA had to renegotiate on the spot. They waited until their contract was up, and then.
But could I just circle back? So I just want to understand, and I'm just interested in your thought process. Why wouldn't we require, if the other cities are wishing they had, just for the implementation, why wouldn't we learn from hindsight.
So I think to answer your question, staff recommendation tonight, as we said, included that and was in the assumptions we made with the financial chart. That's a policy decision. So that's one of the decision points we are seeking from direction from council this evening.
So one of those would be, do we direct as part of pathway 3, HOAs required or HOAs have the option?
Correct. That's one of the subsequent decision points pending on which pathway you all proceed with.
And then to circle back to the original question, I don't know, you may not have, and that's fine. Have they surveyed their residents? Is there a level of satisfaction post? And I'm not sure how long they've had this. And
There are a couple of cities who are working on that. And when Louisville, they recently, their contract was up for renewal and they changed haulers and there was a resident survey involved in that. We haven't seen the results. I'm just looking at Garrett to make sure we haven't seen the results. But what we do know is that of the 40 or so Colorado cities that have gone this road, none of them have gone back to the open market.
okay. I think that's all I have for now. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Henkel.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to answer your question today. I would like to hear more about option 3. Thank you.
That was easy. Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. So I'm struggling a little bit more on this option 3, looking specifically at the HOAs. My comments are the same as before. We have, just to really think about this, we have these HOAs and it's not all of them. I have HOAs in my ward that I know of at least one that doesn't actually have single hauler trash. So just because they're an HOA doesn't mean they have it, but we have quite a few HOAs who have successfully been doing single hauler with recycling for years. And we're looking at them. I mean, I think we're not looking at them as a model that they should be saying, let's get all these other, non-HOA and HOAs without trash, universal hauler service up to those standards. Instead, I feel like we're punishing our HOAs. And here's one of the things I'm looking at and I struggle with is that my HOA and others that I know of, I've been asking questions. I know some of them don't want to say their rates, and so I'm not going to repeat them tonight, but they're in that $10 to $20 per month range. So all of a sudden, we're going to take an HOA who is already they already have a lower diversion rate if they're doing this successfully. I understand the only thing they're missing is what's the term for it? The trash, the trash can size. Like, we really want to move them down, but it's really hard to all of a sudden say, instead of paying $10 to $20 a month, you're going to be paying $30 to $40 a month for the same basic service. And then we really haven't improved that diversion rate. So that's where I'm struggling is, I don't see why, if we were going to leave all of Broadlands out or all of Anthem or all of Wildgrass, why there would even be a fee, because they wouldn't even be part of the bid. And the other part I'm struggling with is, how is it so difficult that if Redleaf with 550 residents can go out and also negotiate a very good contract, Anthem can and Broadlands can and Wildgrass can, why can't the city with half of its residents competing, why is that hard to negotiate a similar rate? And that gives that, I've heard the comments that, you lack the competition. So I'm not understanding how leaving HOAs with the minimum standard, it could increase. I'm not saying it couldn't increase to include every week recycling or to increase add composting in or something to help the diversion rate. But I'm just not understanding why we would take the HOA service away, which feels like we're punishing HOAs in my opinion. I would love to hear more from others. I'm not set on option 3. So I'd like to hear more from, I guess, the rest of my colleagues on what they're thinking, but I'm not convinced. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Liu.
If in your conversation, what you've learned about these contracts with the waste haulers, if a group were to go from like an HOA, everyone has a 96-gallon trash can, and we were to just pass in an ordinance that every trash hauler in Broomfield has to do pay as you throw, what would be the impact on the HOAs in just doing that as their contract expired?
If I can, Mayor, we'd like to pause and maybe just bring up the slides and do the deep dive because we've addressed most of these questions in ways that I think will be helpful. So if we can pull the slides back up and let's see, I'm going to pass it to Allison and I'll tell you what slide number in just a second.
No, I've got it here. Sorry. Yeah, he's good. All right. Thank you. Thank you all so much. We wanted to, we've put together information we thought would be helpful for you in your decision making, but we didn't want to assume what you needed to know. So, but I think we'll go through what we planned and then come back to the questions that you still have at the end, if that's okay. Right. All right. So in our current system, can't see you when I have those glasses on, which is very disorienting. Might be time for the bifocals. We license our haulers. As you know, we have 11 haulers who are licensed to do residential trash collection. There are 4 main ones who have most of the routes for us. And they are required to report on the waste that they carry, how much tons they haul away as part of the licensing requirements. The team has met with all of our licensed residential haulers since we talked in February at the community forum. And none of the licensed haulers are currently offering volume-based pricing. So we wanted to point that out. All of them are offering recycling, which is great. Sometimes it's bundled, sometimes you have to pay extra. But there isn't any kind of pay-as-you-throw or volume-based pricing, which is one of the most effective ways to boost the recycling and compost rate is you provide a financial incentive for producing less trash and make it a bit more costly to produce more trash. We have specialized haulers who are focused on compost and one who's focused on recycling only. And then we have, of course, our city investments in infrastructure, such as our recycling center, the tree branch recycling program, and wanted to point out that residents are actually not required to contract for waste removal services under our current municipal code. Next slide, please. We put a survey online on our Broomfield Voice page. We set what we thought was an ambitious goal to get 200 responses, and we got 900. So we were pretty happy about that. To put it in perspective, there were 1,100 responses to the 2021 community-wide survey. So not to say that this is a statistically valid sample, it's definitely a convenient sample, but there were a lot of people who cared about what this conversation. 64% of the respondents didn't live in an HOA, 36% did live in an HOA. And the most common type of service that people are subscribed to, 59% of them have weekly curbside trash pickup and 2 weeks recycling every other week. I think that's a service model that we're all familiar with. About 20% have only weekly curbside trash pickup. And then 5% have weekly trash and recycling. And then one thing we wanted to point out is that only about 4% of the respondents reported compost services of any kind. So we had a lot of different options for compost. And when I say compost, I want to be really clear about that because we use it as a catch-all. So we're talking about organics collection like food scraps, yard waste. Some people would call it green waste. Compost is a catch-all term, but compost is the stuff that's collected, but it's also what you do with it. You compost it and turn it into soil and mulch and things. So I just wanted to be clear about that. Next slide, please. You can't understand our current residential waste management system without understanding our HOA distribution. About 45% of Broomfield residents live in an HOA. And this map shows the residential parcels within an HOA. So it's slightly different. It's not population distribution. 60% of our residential land parcels are part of a homeowners association, but only 45% of population lives there. We had contact info for property managers or similar for 71 HOAs, and we reached out to all of them. We heard back from about 51, and then 35 gave us pretty robust information. So we learned that 35 of those contract with a trash hauler, and we did hear back from all of the largest HOAs. 35 contract with a trash hauler, 34 of them also contract for recycling. 9 of them had no contract and 9 weren't sure. 2 offer access to composting services. So there is pretty widespread coverage of a single hauler approach in HOAs, as council members have pointed out, and it typically is including access to recycling. None of them have volume-based pricing or pay-as-you-throw, none of the ones who have communicated with us yet. And again, that's a key difference as to why we see the importance of including the HOAs in boosting our diversion rates, is bringing that volume-based pricing for trash services to the whole community. 14 of the HOAs did offer a choice in trash cart size, but not necessarily differential pricing based on the size of the trash cart. Next slide, please. So looking at all of the information we have at hand about our current residential waste management system here, we actually feel like it's 2 systems. The HOAs, most of them have contracted for a single hauler. They're getting a good deal. They're getting good prices, good rates. They don't have as many trucks on the road. They have a good thing going on that we are looking at. And we're keen to borrow some of their negotiating power, actually. People who live outside of an HOA or in an HOA without a contract, they can choose whoever they want to take away their trash, their recycling, their composting. They're on their own to kind of figure out who that might be. The prices aren't standardized. It's hard to find out what it will cost you unless you contact them directly. And there isn't a lot of transparency in it. And in those neighborhoods, we're seeing more trucks on the road and the associated road damage, noise and air pollution, and road safety risks that come along from that. In both parts of the system, we don't have the volume-based pricing. So there's very little of that happening in Broomfield. It doesn't cost much to fill up a whole bin, a whole big bin full of trash. And then anyone who is interested in diverting into composting is having to contract a separate hauler or join a innovative, program like they have through the Sustainable Broomfield and the Broomfield Grange. Next slide, please. We asked about what people are paying, and we thought the results were pretty interesting. This shows costs reported by the survey respondents regardless of services. So it might include trash, it might include recycling or composting. It's just a broad brushstroke of the range that people are paying. We are seeing some differences between what people pay who live inside an HOA and what people who live outside of an HOA are paying. And then going back to our conversation with the HOA managers, we learned that the average monthly cost reported by those 35 that could give us the cost information was that they're paying for bundled trash and recycling an average of a range of $750 to $2346 per month. Sorry, pretty good prices. Next slide, please. We wanted to compare within one service category to make sure we were comparing apples to apples. So we looked at those who reported weekly trash pickup and every other week recycling, the most common service category. And here it's very clear that the residents who live outside of HOAs are paying quite a lot more. They're reporting paying quite a lot more than their fellow community members who live in HOAs. We do want to say that a lot of our HOA residents who completed the survey weren't sure what they pay because it's part of the dues, so you don't necessarily know. And sometimes the information we received from a HOA property management company didn't confirm what residents had reported. So but the residents tended to overestimate what they're paying compared to what the property managers told us. Next slide, please. Okay, now, so path 1, I will warn you up front. This one has the most slides and the most information because most of them are also relevant for pathway 3. So bear with me on that one. And next slide, please, Curtis. Thank you. So under this pathway, we're talking about universal waste collection. And I would like to say up front that if council directs us, to pursue this path or pathway 3, I think we do need to talk about calling it something else. But when we consulted with the communications team around community engagement leading up to this study session, we felt it was important to use the consistent language that we have been using in the community so nobody got confused. But once we would start talking about a specific program with concrete parameters, we need to call it something else because it isn't universal. It's a path towards universal availability of these services. So the city contract envisioned in this path, it would include trash and recycling collection with all at the same price. So you pay for your trash and you get the recycling services bundled in, and volume-based pricing for trash. So you choose a smaller cart size, you pay less. You choose a bigger cart size, you pay more. It could include some kind of organics or compost collection. That's another decision point that we'll come back to, what that looks like. And spoiler alert, the recommendation is to include it somehow and as much as we can. It's just complicated at the moment to know what that will look like, but we'll be looking for direction into which options to pursue through the RFP process if we go down this road. The city contracted services would include single-family residences and multifamily units of 7 or fewer. Those are state requirements because we're not allowed to include commercial properties, businesses, construction, larger multifamily units in city contracted waste removal services. It could include mobile homes. It could include residences within HOAs or not, and that's a further decision point for council. Won't include business, construction, commercial. And how we do this is we issue a request for proposals, and the city and county of Broomfield has a great procurement process. It's competitive, it's transparent, there's standard procedures we use, and there's a lot that can be done through the bidding process. That I'll come back to that in a moment. And then there would be an ordinance would be required to make our municipal code amendable, to facilitate being able to do this in the code. And then the contract would be approved through a resolution. So you have a list of the benefits and drawbacks in the memo. And I don't want to take your time tonight going fully through that list. But there are a few things that we wanted to point out and just make sure. And it comes back to trade-offs, right? And what is the definition of a trade-off is when you're trying to balance out different sides of an equation that can't be balanced at that time. And all of these decisions are full of those things. So on the benefit side, you have residents who can have a smaller bin size, they pay less. And the flip side of that is the pay-as-you-throw volume-based pricing model means residents who choose a larger bin are paying more than those who are paying less. Those who have the smaller bin paying more than those who are paying less. That's great math for you. And what we want to make sure you understand is that some people choose to have a big bin and some people have to have a big bin because they have a large household. So there is an impact on bigger households that we would be looking at through the contracting process of what kind of discounts and pricing structures would be available to make sure that that volume-based pricing doesn't negatively affect our households that are already disproportionately affected by inequitable systems. I think we've talked quite a bit about the benefits and drawbacks. I'll come in a minute to resident views on the benefits and drawbacks and concerns. And I think what I wanted to just say right now is many of people's concerns we can address through the RFP and the contracting process. We can put measures in place to provide excellent customer service and make sure there is a resolution. But there are concerns that will remain and that can't be addressed through those processes. And those are the kinds of things you need to weigh. People like to have some choice over who provides their services. And And we even had comments from folks in HOAs who were saying, well, we don't have this choice. So it's been interesting. We did put all of the comments and questions received on the Broomfield Voice page. If you haven't had a chance to look at them, I encourage you to do that. All right. I think on the drawback side is the investment required. If you think back to Danae's chart, there is no way to set up this kind of program without a significant investment from the city and county. It's a partnership approach with the hauler, and the haulers we've met with have been really clear about that they want to work with us, and many of them would see themselves as partners in helping reach the zero waste goals, not just providing a service or managing a contract. And so to do that well, and to be able to provide customer service resolution to the degree that we know our Broomfield residents want, to do it the Broomfield way, requires some staffing that we don't currently have. Slide, please. So Danae spent a while talking about this in the beginning. I don't want to go over what she already said, and so I'm just quickly trying to think about what are the additional points you need to know. Really, what's behind these startup FTE numbers is a request for a zero waste coordinator that would be coming to you anyway in the 2024 budget package. If direction is given to pursue this pathway, we would ask for it as a mid-year hire this year in a 2023 supplement to help get the RFP process tight and running. And then there's FTE needed to support outreach and education. One thing we know from the evidence and from other sister cities who have done this is that key to success is a really tight communications rollout plan. And the contract itself provides the infrastructure. We also have to equip our residents with the knowledge of what to do, how to do it when, and the right levels of community engagement to get people motivated to participate. Just putting the bins at people's houses doesn't necessarily increase the diversion rate. So the ongoing program costs are really related to that outreach and education. It's an annual ongoing part of this initiative. It's also part of any pathway, and it's its own specific initiative within the zero waste plan, because it's that community engagement and education piece is key for success and for getting to the outcomes. Slide, please. So I showed you the map of our HOA parcels. This is the eligibility map. So every residential parcel that would be eligible to participate in this program is highlighted in, what is that? Orangey brown. There are a few purple ones that are under construction that are likely to be eligible once they're done. This is just to give you a sense of the full territory. Slide, please. And thank you to our GIS colleagues for providing the maps that we're able to show you tonight. Everyone wants to know what this is going to cost. The number one source of concern for people who don't know why we're talking about this or aren't sure they want the city to explore it is they don't want to pay more. Who does? Nobody wants to pay more, right? But it's hard to communicate about it because we don't know what specific prices would be for Broomfield until we go through the RFP process. Fort Collins just approved their contract with Republic to roll out this program in March. So we thought that this price comparison would be the most valuable for us to look at. The other thing about the price comparisons, again, is talking about apples to apples. What we're seeing for a lot of our HOAs and a lot of our residents in general is that weekly trash and every other week recycling. This price includes weekly trash pickup, weekly recycling pickup, yard trimming collection for like 4 to 6 months of the year, it's seasonal, and then 2 bulky item pickups per household per year. So hearing a couple of whispers, yeah, it's pretty great what they were able to squeeze into that. And the price analysis that they did in Fort Collins, based on, they asked residents to send them their trash bills. And then they did an analysis and compared to the prices in the RFP, and we could and would recommend doing something similar if we go down this road. So they could very clearly communicate, if you pay this much, you know, on average, people are paying this much for this bin size, and their costs are going to go down, their costs are going to go up. And it was only the folks at the largest bin size that were experiencing a significant price increase, but they were also getting additional services that they had to pay extra for. I feel like a broken record, but I'm waiting for the simple data point to talk about in all of these things, but it hasn't come because everything is pretty nuanced. Slide, please, Curtis. The timeline, we wanted to be transparent about this again. It's a 9-month process from getting the green light to issue the RFP to coming back to council with the contract. So that means with the ordinances required and with the resolution for a contract. From there, it's a fairly lengthy process also. Although in our conversations with haulers, we were heartened to learn that some of them already have the trucks and could maybe shorten this implementation time to 6 to 8 months, whereas others would need to buy new trucks, order new trucks, which in this day and age takes a long time. So depending on the hauler, we might be looking at an 8 to 18 month timed implementation from signing the contract. And again, Fort Collins is the most recent, most useful example. They signed their contract, approved it, council approved it in March, and then they will begin services in September 2024. And that has a lot to do with the truck situation for Republic. Slide, please. Digging into the survey results a little bit and being very careful to say, we did not ask in the survey, do you support implementation? We asked, do you support exploration? Because to ask about implementation needs more specificities, which we didn't have back in January when we were trying to, get the pulse of what was going on. 61% of the survey respondents said yes, they support exploration. 37% said no, they don't support it. That again mirrors the same question that was in the community survey from 2021. Those who supported it cited reducing truck traffic and noise, access to compost was a big one. The ability to have bulk purchasing power was significant for our residents outside of HOAs, increasing waste diversion and meeting community goals, and then having equity and a beneficial access for all. The concerns that residents expressed about us exploring this are that they want to keep what they have. Some people really like their haulers. They've tried a few and they've landed somewhere that they like, and they don't want it to be messed with, understandably. Some people are concerned about what the impact of this would be on the open market. We do want to point out that the commercial side, which has a lot of business for haulers, would remain an open market. We're not allowed to contract for that as a city and county. So while there might end up being one hauler for a residential contract, there would still be open market for large multifamily units, commercials, businesses, things like that. That said, there is a growing unease among our Front Range colleagues that, more and more cities are going this way, and Republic seems to be winning a lot of the contracts. So they have a pretty big residential market share. No one's totally sure what that means, but there are a lot of state protections in place to prevent that from becoming an actual monopoly. Residents want freedom of choice. And there were lots of instances of folks saying they don't want the government to be involved in this. They don't want intervention or control, and then concerns about the monopoly. So like I said, some of these concerns we can address. There was also a consistent thread in emails and comments we received about customer service concerns, like what if I don't like your service and then I can't just change? Right now, if my hauler doesn't pick up my trash, or I don't like what they're doing, I hire someone else. Those concerns we can build into the contracting process. And in fact, Fort Collins, sorry again for bringing the Fort Collins example, but it's the most recent one and it's in my mind. They have a provision in their contract where if there is a certain number of missed pickups, the resident gets a month free. And so there are things we can work into the contract to help beyond just saying you'll have access to customer service and complaint resolution. There can be some teeth in there. Slide, please. When we put the survey out, I might have expected that HOA residents were not in favor of it because they didn't want their situation changed up, and that residents outside of HOAs really wanted it. And we didn't find that at all. It's a real mix. 66% of our HOA respondents said they supported exploration of it, and only 58% of the non-HOA respondents did. I think that speaks to the fact that there's not ever going to be a unanimous direction here, and that's why we're being very careful not to say that the residents want this, because the data isn't really pointing that direction. There are a lot of different concerns in different areas. Okay, slide please. I wanted to give you a few examples of some of the comments for why residents support the exploration or don't support the exploration. And again, the full analysis of the results is available on the Broomfield Voice page, and some of the concerns can be addressed and some of them can't. And the reasons for supporting exploration, some of it is related to zero waste and waste diversion, and some of it is just a real desire to have better access to purchasing power outside of HOAs, and to reduce the truck traffic is a key important variable that's coming up in what residents are saying to us. Slide, please. Interestingly, we did look at the top reasons for supporting or not supporting, and they're the same whether you live in an HOA or not. Okay, slide. Last thing from the survey is about compost collection. We asked that same question. Do you support us exploring options? 71% said yes. And then yeah, 71% said yes. And then here just shows the difference between HOA and non-HOA, and that more of the HOA respondents were interested in the compost options, maybe because they already have better access to the recycling options, and that's what's top of mind for them. Slide, please. Okay, I'm going to take a drink. Phew, we made it through pathway 1. I want to just pause, and there are lots of questions about HOAs that we haven't answered yet, partly because the baseline pathway for 1 and 3 assumes, the minimum service area would be outside of HOAs. And then it's a further decision point, it's a policy decision. How do we roll in HOAs or not? But before we move on, coming back to this idea of prices, and it's true that the HOAs have been able to negotiate good prices and might see their prices. Some HOA residents would see their prices increase, some would see them maybe decrease depending on what bin size and service levels they select. And I just totally lost where I was going with that. So I'm going to just keep going on with this pathway. We had a plan and then we disrupted the plan a little bit, but it's good to be flexible. There's more slides about HOAs and what we know, what difference it makes to the diversion impact and the considerations. So I will come back to it. I'm not just going to ignore it. I won't try to retrieve it now and make a mess of it. Pathway 2, adopt a residential recycling ordinance. The Zero Waste Action Plan does present both universal waste collection and the residential recycling ordinance, which it calls a community-wide recycling ordinance. You know, as both, nope, not yet. Quiet from the peanut gallery. Thank you, though. I'm not ready for the next slide. Actually, you can do the next slide. You're right. Sorry, Garrett, you're totally right. A couple of the key tools for increasing recycling and composting, as we talked about, are that bundled trash and recycling and the volume-based pricing structure. There's different ways to deliver those to the community. A residential recycling ordinance is one of them. And this is done, as Councilmember Lim was discussing, through licensing requirements. So under this ordinance, all of our licensed haulers would be required to offer recycling services bundled with trash. Many of them already do that. And it would require them to offer the pay-as-you-throw / volume-based pricing. Now, some of them are offering different bin sizes, some of them aren't. Some of them don't currently carry or aren't able to carry the smallest size bin. So this does leads to some challenges for haulers that are worth it in the payoff. This ordinance could require haulers to offer organics and compost collection, and that's a further decision point that we would come back to. The minimum path would be the volume-based pricing and bundled recycling and trash. We're not calling it pay-as-you-throw as much because it's not true pay-as-you-throw, which is typically based on bags, and you pay whatever trash you generate, you pay for that. What we're talking about is a size of cart-based pricing system. So it's slightly different. This is an ordinance which would just be passed in the normal ways. Slide, please. Yeah, sorry, I missed this. I forgot to talk about the diversion rates, but you've seen them. Basically, across all these pathways, the more services you had and the wider the scope of the path, the better diversion you get. So for some of these pathways, we do have to start thinking about what's worth it for a 1% gain, for example. With the benefits and trade-offs of this ordinance, it's a little bit tricky because on the one hand, it seems great. And we spent a while actually talking about it as staff, like, why wouldn't we just recommend this? Because this seems like a really effective way to get at the problem. And it doesn't require all these budget allocations, as many. And the answer is on the drawback side. And there are a couple of them that might not be, sort of in plain sight. And one is that with the current state that we have, where our HOAs have great collective bargaining power or bulk purchasing power, and then residents outside HOAs don't have access to that. If you add an ordinance like this, when Boulder did it and when Fort Collins did it, they saw prices go up across the board. It's expensive for haulers to implement this, and they raise their prices. So prices go up for everybody, okay, but that means potentially widening the equity gap that we have between our HOA and non-HOA residents, because the non-HOA residents still wouldn't have the access to the group contracting that could help lower the price. And just looking at my note, because I know there was one more thing I wanted to say about it. Some haulers have suggested that it might not be worth their while to bring volume-based pricing at a neighborhood level, and that they would reconsider contracts with HOAs if this were introduced. thought it was important for you to know that. That was late incoming information just last week, which is why it doesn't appear.
Can you
in the
elaborate
memo.
on that a little bit?
Sure.
I'm not sure what that means. It's kind of a big one.
It is kind of a big one.
Kind of a big one.
So implementing the volume-based pricing means haulers have to offer a range of bin sizes. There's overheads for them in buying the bins and storing them and having to change them out when residents want to change the size of their bins. I'm sorry, I keep trying to look behind me and then I lose the mic. And so in conversations with haulers, a couple of them had said, you know, they weren't sure it's worth it. It cuts into their profits if they have to offer that kind of service at a neighborhood level. So they may not choose to provide an HOA specific contract if these requirements were passed. I think it becomes more of an issue in pathway 3 because under pathway 2, they have to do it. They, you know, to be licensed to provide these services in the city, they have to offer all these bins anyway, so they can pass the costs on in other ways. But again, they're passing them on to residents outside of HOAs who aren't bargaining for the lower prices.
Well, Ms. Harvey, I did find out that there's actually some residents that do a pay-as-you-throw with a private service in Broomfield. So I wasn't sure if you said that nobody's using pay-as-you-throw or just the survey respondents.
I probably did say that, and what I meant was none
Okay.
of the licensed haulers are offering, they're not using that pay structure.
But one of the residents told me that she does have that pay structure.
Okay,
She pays for a smaller bin.
well, that's interesting.
I know.
That hasn't
so-
come across our radar.
Yeah, I just wanted to put that out there so it's not everybody, maybe few, but
No, we have heard from a few residences who don't contract for hauling at all. They say I compost almost everything, I recycle everything, and every few weeks I take a small bag of trash, you know, somewhere to my friend's business lets me use it, or we take it to the dump. So there are, you know, we do have residents who are working really hard to minimize their footprint in this way. Which reminds me that I forgot to mention an important thing about the city contracted services. And there's an opportunity there to have a couple of variances to accommodate residents in that situation. And there are other cities that have done that. So they don't get penalized for not producing trash.
thank you.
So the budget for this is smaller, but not insignificant. We do estimate, you know, that we would have to add staff to get this running well, to do the kind of community engagement that's required, and to really help with the education ahead of this coming into force with the haulers. And then the ongoing expenses after the effective date is the 0.5 FTE equivalent for outreach and education. And then the $15,000 a year for marketing materials, advertising campaigns, helping people know how and what and when and why to recycle. Okay. Slide, please. The timeline for this one is also tempting because it can happen sooner. There has to be enough of a lead time between the ordinance passing and then the effective date to give haulers time to comply, to do what they need to do to be able to provide this kind of service. But we do anticipate that it could be done. We could come back with an ordinance within 4 months or so of getting the green light to do that. And then we would, during that time, we would talk with haulers about what kind of lead-in time is really needed for them. But we've heard sort of 8 months, 12 months there. And then a further decision point for this would be, do group contracts also have to comply with the volume-based pricing? Sorry, I got confused. No, this is a requirement for haulers that would eventually apply to group contracts, but there would need to be a lead-in period that we would work with HOA boards and property management companies to know, is that 3 years? Is it 5 years? So that they don't have to ditch their current contracts, but that they roll into a new negotiation situation when that time comes. Okay, now slide. Okay. Are you still with me? I still have eye contact, which is great. So this is pathway 3. And you can, next slide, please. This is really about doing both. And I do want to reiterate that this was the vision of the original Zero Waste Action Plan. And it's a question, I think the question before you tonight is the timing. Is it the right time for doing both? The key feature of this path is that individuals and groups, for example, HOAs that might be opting out of a city contract, they still have similar service levels. So everyone in the whole community has a financial incentive to produce less trash and pays a little more to produce more trash. Everyone in the community has some options of bin sizes and service levels. They all have access to recycling. Nobody has to look extra for it. Everyone has access to bulk purchasing power if they want it, whether it's through their HOA or through the city contract. And if they want to opt out and hire another hauler, they can, likely for a fee. And we'll come back to that as a further decision point. I guess it's worth saying up front, though, that the opt-out fee, having an opt-out fee impacts participation rates so much that we don't recommend proceeding with the city contracted services without having an opt-out fee. So we have to allow residents to opt out. That's a state requirement. There's not a requirement for a fee. And the fee is something that goes mostly to the haulers to help maintain route efficiencies and subsidize some of the other services that they're providing in addition to curbside collection. And in some cities we know of, they've negotiated a small percentage of that opt-out fee comes to the city. So this option does mean that some residents and HOAs would find their prices increase. It also means they're likely to have access to more services that they don't currently have right now, whether it's smaller bins or whatever add-ons we can incorporate, like yard trimming collection or compost services. And I did want to point out that I think there are great rates that have been negotiated that aren't necessarily guaranteed to persist. Prices are going up from here. We're witnessing incredible inflation, labor shortages, supply chain issues. So we would anticipate that favorable rates for similar service levels, we'd begin to see less of a difference between what HOAs have negotiated up until now and moving forward. I'm not sure I said that in a clear way. Slide, please. Those of you who are good at math or who enjoy it will have noticed that the financial considerations for pathway 3 is not the sum of pathway 1 and 2. They're not additive. So I wanted to talk through that a little bit just to make sure everyone understood how we got there. Standing up city contracted services requires the biggest lift of staff time, of investment. And when we mapped it out in the timelines, our assumption is that the staffing that's required to make that happen and do it well would also be able to handle the residential recycling ordinance. The community engagement and the outreach and education would be similar. It could be combined. It would really be it's a matter of sequencing. So under pathway 2, that one FTE that we had to help get things running, that person would be helping. The duties are pretty similar with getting the contracted services off the ground. So we didn't think we needed to ask for a whole additional FTE for pathway 3. But if someone wants to give it to us, we will take it and find something for that person to do. Okay. The next slide, please. So the timeline. It's just the other two timelines side by side, no big surprises there. The main thing to note is that a key decision point here is, would you want to align the effective date of the residential recycling ordinance with service implementation for the city contracted services? So there would be the option to have an earlier effective date, as we mentioned with Pathway 2, that can begin next year. And then we begin having boosted diversion rates sooner than we might be able to get with the city contracted services. The downside of that is a decent one, which is that when that happens, prices are likely to increase for everyone. And then again, residents outside of HOAs are not in a position to negotiate for better rates. So there could be uncomfortable price disruption for that year or so for the additional diversion. For all of these pathways, we anticipate an intensive need for community outreach and education all along the process of getting ordinances and resolutions and RFPs and things like that, but also leading up to the effective dates and service delivery, making sure the community knows what to expect, how to enroll, how to engage, and then continuing to engage after, not just setting it up and saying, okay, great, good luck, but continuing to grow people's capacity to send less to landfill. Slide, please. Quick chart. This is also in your memo about what we know is what's happening in other selected Front Range cities that either have a universal collection program, city contracted services, or are doing the same thing through licensing that our Pathway 2 looks at. Correlation doesn't equal causation, right, from my public health days, but it's interesting that there's a clear difference in diversion rates between the cities who are using the volume-based pricing, whether they're doing it through city contracted services or through licensing. It definitely has an impact on the diversion rate. Slide, please. So that concludes this portion of the evening. We do have, like I said, more information to go through a little bit on opt-out fees, HOAs, compost, and then the timing of the ordinances, depending on which way you want to go. But at this point, I think we would want to know, has that answered enough of the questions to give direction on a pathway, or are there things we need to dive into more?
No, we appreciate all of the,
Next slide, please.
oh, there's a slide.
Just wait,
This
Danae's
is-
asking for the summary again.
Okay. Well, thank you all so much for the work that you put into this. I have on the last page of the memo, page 17, a summary of decision points. If everybody wants to look on the last page, because that's the asks of our staff and team on what direction do we want to go. It's on the memo. If anybody has it at home, page 17. I don't know if we want to put it up. Anybody need us to put it up, or is it okay? Pardon? I can. Yeah, everybody's got it? Okay, then never mind. Thank you, Austin. So first, does council agree with staff and the ACE's recommendation to pursue Pathway 3, which is implement both a residential recycling ordinance and a city contracted universal collection program? If not, what is council's preferred pathway? These are kind of a lot. What do y'all think the best way to get the feedback to you? I'm asking, I know. Ms. Harvey, we want to finish our questions first because we didn't really finish that. Thank you.
Questions first, and then Mayor, at the end, we'll just kind of, you all are thankfully in the habit of saying yes, 1,
Yeah.
no, 2, yes, 3, please look at 4.
You have a grid?
Well, and what I'll say is the key and initial decision point is which pathway. And then
Yeah.
once there is a decision about that, then we can walk through some of those more detailed questions if it's too much to tackle all at once.
That's fair. We'll continue with our questions. And Jean, I don't know if you finished yours, but we can go back to you. Probably have more now.
I mean, that was the, so I guess, if we do nothing, the diversion rate will not improve. If we choose just pathway 2, there will be an impact to all residents for even if we choose pathway 2 to precede the universal collection in pathway 3, there will be at least a temporary increase in cost for all residents. So I think the key is, are we willing to bite the bullet on, we need volume pricing in order to increase the diversion rate? Is that what I'm hearing is the bottom line here? Are we willing to go to volume pricing? And if that is the case, then even if we were to choose pathway 2, everyone's prices would be impacted across Broomfield. Am I stating that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. Do you want, and we're not going to go into the HOA questions right now, is that correct? We're just going to talk about the pathway 3 or 2.
Yeah, it would be ideal if we could stay on the pathways, just so then we can at least get that direction tonight. And then those subsequent conversations will have more questions we know that we can address at that time as well.
Okay. Oh, I do have an FTE question. So I had a conversation with this hauler, wrote, I guess, everyone into council individually and said, do you have any questions? We'll answer them. And he said he spoke with staff too. So the way he presented it was that it could vary according to hauler, but that the hauler would be the ones doing a lot of the community education. They would have meetings with the residents. And so they would be doing the billing, they would be doing the rescheduling, the communication for, it's a snow day, your hauler isn't coming, blah, 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 blah. So that was my question behind, do we really need 2 FTEs permanently? Do you want to address that?
I'll take it. And then Allison, if you want to fill in the gaps, we absolutely do. And it's Councilmember Lim, the juxtaposition between wanting to get to the place to where we hit at least some of these diversion goals. This team that is sitting here right now have worked on nothing but this, at least 5 of them, for about 4.5 or 5 months now. Nothing but this. So not only from, and I understand we would love to be able to package it and hand it off. It just doesn't work that way. Broomfield's structure is not that way. When people are complaining, if they can't get a hold of and or the various routes, and or when we have paving or chip sealing or development or closures or any of that type of stuff, the internal mechanism is going to have to be truly one person that kind of oversees all of the contract stuff, and the maintenance and the modifications and the follow-up and the PR. If we could do it for less than 2 FTEs, we would absolutely do that, because it would be it would be easier to sell. So we are confident that at a minimum, it will take 2 FTEs.
Okay, those are my questions for now. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Schaaf.
Thank you, Mayor. So the questions that I had on this were kind of were around the 3 tables that were presented. So one of them talked about or kind of compared the residential versus residential. Then the second option or the second, I guess the second pathway. But the table for that option compared residential, but then it compared residential and commercial. And I'm curious why that table and then the third option, I believe the third table compared residential to residential. So I'm curious why that second table compared that included commercial in that piece as well as multifamily in that piece, because all of a sudden you're comparing apples and oranges to apples and apples.
Great question with a couple of answers. First, for pathways 1 and 3, and I think we're talking about the tables that have the estimated diversion rates and how they're affected by different services and the scope. Anytime there's the universal hauler contract in place, there is no comparison to commercial because there can't be that contract in the commercial space. We chose to include it in the ordinance because it was presented as part of the ordinance in the original zero waste plan. And we had received question from a council member about the differential impact of residential versus commercial. And we thought it might be helpful for council members just to see that teased out because we weren't able to do that in the action plan itself. But then the recommendation would be to come back to what are the different ways that we can get at that commercial waste diversion, because the community engagement so far has focused on the residential side and hasn't gone down that path.
Okay, so I guess, so if I were to look at table 1, the all eligible residences, the trash pay as you throw plus recycling, this is on page 10. 10. And so it's 2%. And then the trash pay as you throw recycling plus yard trimmings is 3%. And then the trash pay as you throw plus recycling plus all compost is 6%. And then the table 2, which is on page 12, the residential plus commercial is 3%. Trash pay as you throw recycling. Trash pay as you throw recycling plus yard trimmings is 5%, and then trash pay as you throw plus recycling plus all compost is 11%. So theoretically, maybe I'm totally off. Could you add those 2 tables together and come up with your table 3? And why does table 3 look so vastly different than what those combined numbers would be?
The simple answer to that complex question is that it's not really additive.
Okay.
Because the diversion impact for pathway 1 has the same modality behind it as for pathway 2. It's the volume-based pricing and the bundled services, extending those to more households, more residents is really what's getting us there. So doing both doesn't give an additive effect. It gives I don't know what the right mathematical term is here for this. I'm looking at Alex, who has been living in these numbers. So you get like 6, we got 6 plus 6 is 8, right? That's essentially what you're saying.
Yeah, no, and I think that it sounds like what you're saying is that there are some elements in that option 2 that are already included in that option 1.
Yes.
And so
it's a different way. It's a different mechanism for achieving that.
Yes.
And then the option 3, what option 3 adds in is people who aren't participating have that same volume-based pricing applied to them.
Awesome.
And, yeah.
That answers my question. Thank
Okay.
you. So looking at looking at these pieces, this doesn't calculate reusing, reducing at all. And so I'm curious that because that is a piece that we hope that people will do as well. And part of this program is to not only recycle, but reuse and reduce. So when we start to calculate those percentage of diversion, if we all of a sudden reduce our amount of solid waste in general, so I think right now we're at about 78,000 tons. If we reduce that to say 50,000 tons, not 50 tons, 50,000 tons, and our diversion rate is still the same percentage, it's a good thing, right? That we've reduced our tonnage of solid waste, but it doesn't increase our diversion rate at all. So how do we calculate when we've actually reduced our overall waste, solid waste, but yet haven't increased our diversion rate?
The way we calculate our current diversion rates, I think it might help answer your question to understand that. We know the tonnage sent to landfill because of the trucks who drive the loads to landfill and get weighed. We know the tonnage that gets diverted because they're getting weighed at the recycling center, at A1 Organics. And then we add all that up to get our denominator, the total tonnage of waste that we're sending somewhere, and then the proportion of the diversion rate. So two parts to your question. The first one, reducing and reusing, completely essential in a zero waste perspective, right? Our zero waste action plan is focused on really the recycling part and providing infrastructure and education towards helping people know how to take advantage of those services. And as we get them in place, we also envision potential for beginning to include more the reuse and the reduce in the community outreach and education. And there's regional initiatives beginning to happen. There's communities who are a little further along in the process who are paving the way on that we would like to bring in once we can get some of these other infrastructure things set up, if that's the direction of council. How that affects the waste diversion calculations is something I would have to come back on because we don't have a way to capture those apart from a reduction in the overall tonnage that would be going to landfill.
Okay, and maybe it's a separate metric. I mean, I believe it's something that we should celebrate regardless. In that if we reduce our overall tonnage, that's something to be celebrated. And perhaps it's a tonnage per capita that we start to calculate, and that we have this data, and we ought to at least continue to track that. The last question I have is around compost. And that's kind of in terms of when I read through this memo, it's the kind of the elephant in the room. It's the piece that I've heard a lot about is, hey, we want this so that we can have compost, but there's so much going on with A1 Organics right now. And what is that long-term solution for compost? Is it these smaller little scraps and kind of those compost haulers, or are we going to be able to get a waste hauler that is going to offer a curbside compost pickup for the entire community of Broomfield?
It's difficult to say right now what the long-term solution is. We're beginning to get a good picture of what the next few years could be. And I think for those who aren't familiar with what's happening, A1 Organics is the main large compost processing facility for the Front Range. Almost all of the compost trucks you see are taking their loads there, even including some of our local specialized compost haulers are some taking to A1 Organics. Now they're having a problem with contamination in what they're receiving. There's too many items that aren't compostable, which messes with the process and makes the end product, which is soil for farms and mulch and things like that, less desirable. And our composting and recycling is only as good as the end markets. So there's a problem there with the end market. And what A1 Organics is doing is trying to fix the quality of the end product so that there's a good end market. In the meantime, there are a lot of investigations happening. There are local haulers trying to try something different. There are big haulers looking at setting up transfer stations. There might be a lot more options available in the next couple of years that we just can't see from here. The two-line summary of what staff would recommend for pursuing compost options through city contracted services, if that's the direction, is to include it in the RFP, because some haulers are absolutely willing to do that, to include it in the bundled service. The larger haulers seem more amenable to that. Let's ask. We don't know how much it's going to cost is the thing. And in Arvada, they did this recently and ended up not including compost because it raised the prices too much for residents. But that's an opt-out compost service model. There's also an opt-in model. And some of the smaller haulers have expressed interest in the citywide contract for residents who want to opt in. So those residents who are ready to do more composting and to provide a clean stream could have access to the services that way. And then there's the in-between piece that they went for in Fort Collins, which is the seasonal yard trimmings. So it's not just grass clippings, it's leaves and other things, plant-related items. And from our waste audit, we know that about 15% of what our community sends to landfill is those yard trimmings. So it does make a difference to have that as a stop. And I think what we're hoping to do as staff, if we go down this path, is look at all of those options to be able to come back and say, here's what we can offer at a reasonable price point for residents, and here's where it will get us.
Awesome. Thanks for that information. I think that definitely helps the conversation moving forward. So, to Councilmember Lim, there are kind of four options. One of them is the status quo, not do anything. Pathway 1 is universal collection. Pathway 2 is the recycle ordinance, and in the pathway 4 would be, or pathway 3 would be the universal collection plus recycle ordinance. I'm fully behind that recycle ordinance. I think that this gives a lot of options to our entire community. I think that what this does, though, is it really mucks up our HOAs in a big way, and it starts to change those dynamics in the HOA. And when I look at that, I say, well, then pathway 3 is really the best option, because that's all of a sudden solves a lot of that within the HOAs. I'm behind pathway 3. I think that this is the best thing for our community, and I think it continues to move us forward to what our community goals are for waste diversion. So thank you, staff.
Councilmember Ward.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple questions before I go into what I think. How does, volume-based pricing work for apartment complex when it relates to the recycling ordinance that we talked about?
So that is a great question. And it could go one of a couple ways, right? The recycling ordinance could apply to the same eligibility criteria that the universal collection contract would apply to as a starter, and then could also look at including larger multifamily units. That is something that definitely needs more research and understanding what the barriers and opportunities are there. Just simply having space for bin placement, we realize, is a kind of a barrier there. So we would caution, I guess the caution in widening that net too much in the beginning is making sure that it's a solution that is really going to be helpful for those residents. And that's typically the larger multifamily units get rolled in with commercial properties and could be tackled at the same time, but don't have to be. And we could come back with more research on that.
Okay, I was just curious on how that worked, because I live in an apartment complex and I know we don't get, we get little bins to put the trash in, but for mine, at least someone every single day comes around and takes that and takes it to a much larger bin, or you can walk it over to the bin yourself and throw it in the industrial size container. So I'm not sure how you calculate pay as you throw or volume-based pricing. And then a question on the timeline. So I think in the staff memo, pathway 1 said the RFP process would take about 9 months. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. At the end of that process, and we as council gets to see everything, we theoretically have the ability to do either nothing and just stay with what we have, or we can do any of the different varieties, correct?
Yes and no. If there isn't a bid, then obviously we can't proceed. And if there isn't a bid that meets minimum criteria or that council deems satisfactory, it's an option not to proceed, but we wouldn't use the RFP process as a way to better understand what's possible, right? There needs to be a clear signaling of intent to proceed in good faith for a solid procurement process. And I apologize, Councilmember Ward, I had misunderstood your original question. And I answered about recycling in larger apartment complexes, but the pay-as-you-throw requirement in the other cities that have done this licensing requirement, they don't apply that to the large multifamily units because it's very complicated space-wise.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I would go with pathway 3, to be quite frank. The residents over in First Filing, for example, which are not part of an HOA, one of the biggest complaints I hear from those residents is the number of trash trucks going up and down the streets every single day, every single week. And I think we need to have that volume-based pricing, or that large amount of residents to get a competitive bid that actually, I think, as a whole would lower prices for, I think, most residents. And giving that recycling option, especially for apartment complexes, because I know not every apartment complex offers recycling. So that's where I stand. Pathway 3.
And Councilmember Leslie, who is joining us remotely.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate it. So first of all, I want to thank staff. I can see, and certainly we know from what's been said, how much work has gone into this. Appreciate all this effort. This is a complex and important issue, and I very much appreciate all the effort you've made to present this to us. Obviously, there's going to be a lot more conversation needed. Number 2, I want to reinforce what Councilmember Anderson's comments were regarding the HOAs and the cost. So there'll be more conversation that's going to be needed around this whole thing in that regard. Everybody's concerned about costs individually and collectively. And it's a bit unfortunate that staff wasn't able to do much in terms of categorizing potential costs. You mentioned a few things. The reduction in the traffic of trucks would probably reduce the cost of road repair. I heard that a lot while I was running for election, particularly from those unincorporated areas. A lot of frustration over the amount of trucks coming through, and the observation by many of the homeowners of roads that had not been too long since they had been repaired and were already deteriorating. So it may be that from the experience from our fellow municipalities that there is some information already being gathered as to the cost savings that can be realized from this, but that would be very helpful if we could see that and have a better understanding of what that may be. Given all that, I support the third approach to this. I think this issue is too important for us to go halfway. I think it's too important for us, not only as Coloradans, but also as part of the national agenda to reduce waste. And again, there's already been some council actions in the past that provided targets that we really should uphold and achieve. But as I said a minute ago, I think that we need to spend a bit more time probably engaging with more conversation with the HOAs about some of the concerns that they may have. Certainly, being in Anthem Ranch, we already have much of that at our disposal once a week, having the recycling, having the regular garbage pickup, and then every other week having the recycling picked up is so convenient, so easy, and I frankly have never heard anybody complain about it. So I don't buy the issue of government overreach here. I think that the real focus for us needs to be on reducing waste, ultimately reducing costs, but improving our air quality and the other factors that are accompanied with that. And of course, education, there's a lot of things that individual homeowners can do just at home with certain strategies that would reduce waste, increase recycling, and the same thing with disposal of garbage as well as food waste and those kinds of things, which I'm pleased will be added to this process. But I will support number 3. Thank you.
Thank you. And who else needed to go for first round? Councilmember Anderson, oh, we already went. Did everybody go first round? It's okay, it's a study session. Anything goes, Councilmember. All right, so then we had Marshallson and Anderson for second round.
Thank you, Mayor. One question I have, I haven't really changed my position, but I have to admit that the amounts of Fort Collins kind of were a little bit of a sticker shock when you looked at the comparison that we were given before of the local communities. It's significantly more. Can you speak to why you think those are higher? My question, couple of questions is, one is the fact that there's so much distance for the haulers to travel up to Fort Collins compared to around here is in the metro area. Could that be part of it? I guess that's.
The one thing I can say for sure about the Fort Collins contract is it's the first one to be fully negotiated post-pandemic. The numbers that we provided as averages in our communications were all contracts negotiated late, I almost said late 90s, early 2000s. Goodness, if only. They're a few years old and pre all these things we're seeing with inflation, cost rising, labor shortage, supply chain. Now I'm doing the broken record thing again. I think that's a factor in the prices we see in Fort Collins. We have asked them if there was also an additional cost added. Sometimes in the RFP process, cities ask for the pricing from the haulers. Sometimes they say there has to be a multiplier to get the volume-based pricing with the desired effect. I don't have an answer to that yet, if Fort Collins did that. And that is as much as I can say about their pricing.
What impact do you think, do we foresee the 2026 implementation of the producer responsibility bill having on the costs? Do we know yet?
We don't know. The extended producer responsibility program says that there will be free recycling services for every resident statewide, and that funds can come to local government. What we've heard from the state and from EcoCycle, our local zero waste nonprofit experts, is that having city contracted services in place heading into 2026 positions us well to receive those funds right away instead of having to get things organized. And it's presented to us that we might have a little more agency in what that looks like versus the producer responsibility organization saying, we're going to provide these services and we're using this hauler and we're doing it with these trucks on these days. But there are very many questions. Their oversight board has just started meeting a few months ago and we don't know, there's a lot we still don't know about what that will look like.
And with the RFP process, will we have an opportunity to weigh in on what criteria will go into the RFP?
I'm
Customer service.
Yes.
Fee, all that kind of stuff.
Councilmember Marshallson, you'll review. So whatever council determines on the front end, the components, that's what'll be in there.
That's what I thought. And then, that was my last question. The sticker shock on the Fort Collins was a little bit high for me, but then I remembered that we just increased our water rates. We did a tiered system to encourage conservation on the higher water users. So I think that a little bit higher cost on the large volume trash can with the savings on the small one is something that is beneficial to the community. And then just one thing I wanted to mention to the parts of the community that I know don't like the idea of government overreach. I'm of the firm belief that the free market works well in areas with optional consumer choice. You're buying a TV, you're buying a cheeseburger. The free market works well in those situations. But the free market to work, you have to have equality of equity of information and power in the bargaining relationship. I mean, there's a reason why a lot of us believe that we shouldn't have we should have a single payer healthcare system, because in the back of a ambulance when you're having a heart attack is not the time you're going to do comparison shopping. So I do think that this is a service that is pretty much required for everybody to have. So I think that the benefit to having a single hauler that's negotiated on behalf of everybody outweighs the perceived benefit of being able to switch your hauler whenever you want, especially for non-HOAs who don't have the ability to really comparison shop. I mean, they can comparison shop, but they can't negotiate. So anyway, that's where I'm at, and I'm fully supportive of option 3. Thank you.
Councilmember Anderson.
Thanks. I'm sorry, my first round of questions was before the presentation, so here we go. Okay, so my concerns are less about the pathway. Pathway 3 is fine. It's more about how we're going to treat these HOAs who've been leading the way. I do have some questions. If you're choosing a smaller medium bin, can you get the extra large recycling bin?
Such a short question. It threw me off. In theory, yes. And that's something that gets determined in the contracting process with the hauler, the level of, the bin choice. But typically you can choose the whatever size recycling bin with,
I think that's critical, that if you go with the smaller trash bin, that you actually can have that larger ability to recycle. Like that's something I really think is important. And then I know a lot of people choose a large garbage can not because they fill it up every week, but because they want it when they need it. So what happens if somebody chooses a little small garbage can, then once in a while they have extra trash? Any consideration?
Some contracts include the ability to change the size of your trash bin periodically.
Like one week you have a party.
Yeah, and then sometimes haulers, there can be an additional bag that you can buy a sticker to put a fee on. Again, it's very dependent on the contract and the hauler, but those are options that we would explore.
Perfect. And then do haulers currently allow grass clippings, tree branches, and other yard waste and trash cans? Because if they do, let's get that out of there right away. No one should be throwing that away. Like, that's not something we should be able to reduce. It should not even be in our garbage cans. Do we know? Is that allowed? I don't think anyone can throw that away right now.
Yeah, I think at the moment you can throw anything away that's not classified as the hazardous waste.
Well, do we need an ordinance that says no branches and tree? You can just leave your grass clippings on your grass. This is crazy. Okay. I agree with Councilmember Ward that if we're going to address the equity here, we absolutely need to move fast-paced forward with getting this into apartments as well. Because we are not addressing equity until we start to get recycling and other services for our apartments. So I want to move forward with that pretty quickly right after this one. Ward 4 has, and looking at that map, Ward 4 has a ton of HOAs and most of them offer trash, one does not. And I also have some areas that are not benefiting from the service. So I kind of want to balance this. Like I want to get the services to my constituents who don't have them, who have multiple garbage trucks, while not impacting those in the HOAs who have been leading the way. And there is the little statement at the end, this is my final comment here, that if HOAs are required to, that they can opt out if they're required to contract a service level equivalent to the city's contract. That piece there is critical. If our HOAs are meeting those service levels, they should be able to opt out and not have if the board opts them out, not have every single one of them have to pay that opt-out fee, because they would be left out of the RFP. So that's the critical component for me. Without that, it would be hard to support this. So thank you. But other than that, like I want to get the non-HOA residents to have the service that we have been benefiting for years and leading the way on. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Henkel.
Thank you, Mayor. Ward 4 is bringing in the heat tonight. Never thought I heard those words like we need this now. That's amazing. Okay. Is staff asking us to assess page 17 of this memo right now? Is that something that we're looking at? It sounds like I'm just hearing we're looking at pathway 3 and yes or no. And then from there, we're giving feedback because I'm ready to go on that one.
Let me just check
Okay.
in. Did everybody
Okay.
kind of get consensus around pathway 3?
Yes.
No objections? Okay, so that's set.
Okay.
Then go for it.
Perfect.
Very
Thank
good.
you. I know you guys watch these recordings, so I know you guys write it down too, but so on one, agree to go pathway 3, yes. 2A, yes. 2B, yes. I really think it's important to really implement composting. C, yes. D, yes, if it's equivalent. Let's see, I'm trying to look at that question here. As long as the contract for services equivalent to the city contract, yes. E, let's see, recycling ordinance, does council wish to require residential trash haulers to offer curbside composting as well as recycling? Although this might increase costs significantly, I still just want to explore that a little bit further and kind of flesh that out a little bit more on 2E. Mainly because, we have to figure out if the costs are, I have people on my street, for instance, like I compost and it's costing us quite a bit. And I have other people on my street who say they won't do it because it's just too expensive. So we kind of need to figure out that price point. And I feel like we need more public feedback on that. On 2F, whatever helps us reach our goals more efficiently. Yeah, we can do that. We can expedite that. And I think that's about it. I am very much looking forward to increasing composting. I feel like a lot of people either don't understand it or know how to be a part of that. And I think the education piece of that is going to be super important. And that's why I think staff, bringing staff in early on that and having good communication with our residents on why this is important is going to be really influential on how this is going to be implemented. And I just really appreciate all of your work on this. I came to that night where we all talked about all of this and I couldn't stay the entire night because we had 3 events that night. However, I just really appreciate staff's work on this. It does not go by unnoticed and you guys are really answering a lot of our residents' questions really well. And I like it too that you're saying this is where we're going, and we're going to take one step at a time. It's not necessarily all at once, all at one time. And I feel like that's also very important. So thank you.
Thank you. Go
May
ahead.
I add just something? I'm sorry to interrupt.
Of course.
I just wanted to help. If we could pull up slide 35, I just want to make sure the residents as well as council, we have a decision point tree built out to capture what Councilmember Hingle just talked about of these additional decision points. And Mayor, I look to you of what's best. So one, we got the decision point, the big one we needed tonight. So thank you, council, for getting us there. We have these broken out in decision trees of each one, as she mentioned. So one's around the opt-out fee, one around organics and compost, and then one around HOAs. So me or whatever is the most helpful we could do, trunk them out and do them, or if everyone wants to give their feedback like Councilmember Hingle just did, but we do have some visuals if that's helpful of what she's referring to on
I
the
think that
last
would
page.
be really helpful, Ms. Brouillard, after we take our 10-minute recess. So it's about 7:59. We'll be back in 10 minutes. Thanks, y'all. Welcome back, everyone, and welcome to part 2. We were taking comments and questions from council members regarding the direction for our staff. And I believe it was Councilmember Cohen who was up next.
Should be listening. I will go down the list here in a minute. I did want to just, sorry, I didn't have my thoughts organized, but I did want to push back on the idea that we're punishing HOAs. I think we need to take into account that the HOAs did lead the way and they're now enjoying the benefits of universal waste collection. But I think it's interesting, I don't know if the cartographers can help us later down the road, but just looking at that map, this is a broad brush comment, but it appeared that generally most HOAs are where the more affluent residents live. And in the non-HOA areas are the less affluent residents for the most part, who are paying a lot more for their trash versus the people in the more affluent areas are paying a lot less. So I do think there's some equity to be pursued here in providing, lowering the prices in most cases for the folks who aren't in HOAs or in HOAs like mine that don't provide trash services. I think the impact on the people who are in HOAs is probably not going to be very significant cost-wise, looking at what was in the memo, whereas people in my situation would see a significant decrease in cost. I did want to address, there was little comments earlier about people wanting to have the freedom to switch their services. I kind of suspect that's a very low number. At least in my case, where waste management, you have to buy your bin. And if you switch, you have to buy another bin. And that's a significant cost that discourages you from switching, even though you might be mad for a moment at their service. So I would just say, as we've already stated, we've already agreed, I think, pathway 3 is the best way. I do agree to opting in. I need to get the memo back up. So opt-in fee 2, yes. On B and C and the composting, I feel like that's a very small number of people who actually pursue that. I would like to see if we could do that as a separate contract, that we still would have some benefits of a mass contract, but not require everybody to pay into that. And because I do think it might increase the cost for everyone, where a very tiny percentage of people actually do it. I think that survey was interesting that a high percentage said they want it, but I think that's like when you ask somebody if they want to lose weight, 90% say yes. If you ask them they want to take a diet, only 10% say yes or actually do it. So it may be wishful thinking, but whether people actually follow through is probably not a high number. On D, I personally would require HOAs to all opt in. I think we have to keep in mind the community benefits that we will all benefit in terms of greenhouse gases, the wear and tear on the roads, plus all the benefits if we have a contract like Fort Collins that includes the spring cleanup and the fall leaves pickup option. I would note that I've been very interested in the fact that Grand Junction does this as a city service. Everybody puts their leaves on the curb and the city comes by and sucks them all up. And this would eliminate the problem, which I will tell Councilmember Anderson does happen. In my neighborhood, all the leaves go in the trash. There's really no other option for folks. For the neighborhoods that have lots of old trees, there's a lot of leaves and there's really no other way if you don't have a trailer or some other way of hauling it away to get rid of your leaves. Let's see, D, yes. E, yes. And on the timing, I'm supportive of whatever is the most effective to increase the diversion. I would final note real quickly is I do think it's disappointing this won't raise, or it was not anticipated to raise the diversion as much as I think we'd all like to see. I think we'll have to follow up with some PR campaigns and community efforts to encourage people to do more of it. Maybe there's some incentives out there, programs that could be adopted, or maybe we can challenge ourselves to beat Boulder and beat their rate. I think that's it.
Thank you. Councilmember Ward.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to finish out with the questions that staff had for council to answer. I am fully supportive of 2A, the opt-out fee. I think that's essential for us to have this. B, yes, I would like us to proceed with the RFP that has both the a composting option and a non-composting option, just so we have that information and we can make an informed decision up here on council. And then see if that, let's say, option is too expensive for full composting. What are those alternatives for us to at least try and address some of that? You know, maybe it is just tree branches, clippings, etc. As it relates to HOAs, I think right now I'm with Councilmember Cohen, that I think they should just be included at this moment. For E, yes, I think we should require that all residential trash haulers offer curbside composting as well as recycling. And when it comes to timing, I do think having that recycling ordinance come in before we can get that universal collection program up and running would be beneficial, at least to address some of the concerns as it relates to diversion from the landfill sooner rather than later.
Thank you. Councilmember Marshall.
Thank you, Mayor. One note on the recycling that was the last part of the question I didn't answer is that I agree with Councilmember Ward that we should do multifamily recycling at the same time we do the other recycling ordinance. So on these questions, yes, on the opt-out fee. Composting, I'd like to see pricing on with included or opt-in, like some other places have done. I think that's important. I support going forward with something like just like tree clippings or something like that if it's too cost prohibitive. On the HOAs, I am a firm vote in favor of not opting them out. So yes on D and no on D1. The whole issue, the whole reason HOAs can now currently get a better rate is because economies of scale. When you bargain together, you get a better rate. And to take away 45% of the community from this contract means that the residents of the non-HO fees are gonna have to pay more. And I do not support that. I do not believe that, and as Councilmember Cohen said, the HOAs tend to be more affluent. I do not believe that they should be, that the rest of this community should be subsidizing them in that way. So I do not support opting them out. Recycling ordinance, I do think that whatever we do for the trash, so for example, if we do an opt-in for compost, then that's what the recycling order should be. I don't think we should do, no compost for the rest for the universal system, but then composting for that. So that's too confusing. The timing, I do think that putting them concurrent at the same time is probably the best idea in my opinion, just because otherwise, if we do the recycling ordinance first, then you have the potential for dramatic increases in price in the interim. And I don't think that community would support that. So I do want to see those two done concurrently as quickly as possible. And I'm hoping that with the RFP process, we can take into consideration the 2026 money that's going to be coming from the state for the recycling, but we'll see how that goes. So does that answer all the questions, I think? So I'm done. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. And back to Councilmember Hinkle.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to quickly note something that I forgot to say. So I wrote it down on the backside of a paper I'm going to recycle. In looking at the RFP in the future, I would like for us to weigh in. I will say that sometimes our council gets too much in the weeds on these things. So I just want to sort of remind council that when if we were to weigh in on what's requested in that RFP, that we could sort of keep it really high level, that we trust staff in their research and what other cities have done and municipalities. And then, if we look into requirements, like if they're unionized or not, things that are important to city council. But I really, trust staff and knowing what other people did in other areas in their RFP and that why they liked it, why they didn't, or what happened in that RFP. Because I know the devil's in the details, but sometimes, we can learn from others as well. Thank you.
Councilmember Hinkle, if I may, Mayor. So on anytime on those RFPs, when you're looking for competitive bids, the more caveats you have attached to an RFP, the more expensive it is. And And the more difficult it is to have a wide breadth of those that reply. So as we move forward, we need to keep that in mind. It's not a good, bad, or it's not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. But it certainly is a thing that needs to be kept in mind.
Councilmember Dougherty.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just go ahead and answer the questions. Yes, I am in support of an opt-out fee for the organics and compost. Yes, I think we should investigate those being included. If that is too expensive, I would also encourage us to look at other options. I would be open to that. In terms of HOAs, I really, so question D, yes, but I'm not so strident that I'd allow this to kill a potential ordinance. And then this should be a Broomfield-wide solution. However, if there were really sufficient verbiage to ensure that services are equivalent, I would potentially be open to it, but I really do want this to be a Broomfield-wide solution. When it comes to recycling, yes, very much in favor of that. And then the timing, I would prefer for both elements to be implemented at the same time. However, different timing would not, that would also not kill this for me. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question about the bidding process. Would we give preference to local contracts, like Colorado based? Would that have any weight?
Mayor, it really hinges on who has the capability to do it, between the staffing, the equipment. Kind of to Councilmember Marsh Holshan's point in Fort Collins, it's not as if it's a Denver firm that's driving back and forth every day to Fort Collins, which is one of the reasons that when staff says it's difficult to really zero in on these costs when everything is so nebulous. You really do have to give them some kind of certainty. It's phenomenally expensive for any kind of firm to answer the RFP. It's labor intensive. It's a lot of hard work. They have to know that there's veracity in what they're putting forward. So while I would love to say, yes, we'll give preference regardless of what it is, whether it's local, whether it's union, whether it's they pay a livable wage, all of those accoutrements that we hear about in construction as a whole. We don't know what we don't know, but what we do know from the research that this team has done is there's not a whole lot of these folks that are out there that have the number of trucks, the volume, the capability to be doing the composting, as well as the recycle and trash pickup, as well as doing it weekly. So there's a lot of HOAs out there, mine included, that we have recycle every other week. So when we go back out to these firms to be able to say, you do get the price with regards to volume. But as we all know, having your cake and eating it too is very expensive. So we'll know more as we discover more.
Thank you. Thank you both. Is there any other, let's go with Lim and then Anderson.
To a opt-out fee, yes. Organics, compost, can we get pricing for opt-in in that? I think that might be most effective. Yes, explore other options for organics if the regular collection is just too expensive. HOAs, can we put out an RFP with both a maximum number possible and which would be all the residents of Broomfield, and tell the hauler to give us a bid if all of the HOA residents were to opt out?
I'm gonna take that one because it would be a very diplomatic answer from Miss Allison over there. The most blatant answer is no, Councilmember Lim. Again, to say we're not sure, we're going to wait for the costs. We've tried to dig as deep as we can on a number of issues. And so the answer would be the same, that if they're not sure that we're sure, they're not going to spend the time to do that RFP. So if we come out and we say, give us a cost for HOAs in and HOAs out, particularly because we have 45% of Broomfield is in HOAs, the likelihood of HOAs in or HOAs out, both of them would be slim to none. So in other words, we kind of have to decide what we're doing before we really go out for, I mean, again, this RFP process, that procurement process is about a 5-month process. These firms spend a tremendous amount of time, effort, and energy to ensure that they have what it is that we need and have the costs as close as they possibly can.
I don't know. My conversation with Waste Management was that, yes, there's a difference between 80,000 residents and 36,000 residents, but not as significant of a difference as you would think. The main difference is that their route is more consolidated, that they're not going to every third house in the process. So if they're going to a concentrated number of residents and skipping one HOA, well, that's an entire area. So it doesn't impact their route as much in the big scheme of things, which would impact their cost. That was the nature of the conversation I had that they said.
So the recommendation then would be have the RFP with HOAs included. And then council could apply that logic that you just laid out to have a different level of costs that are associated with it. I mean, again, the question is, would they be willing to spend the time, effort, and energy on two polar opposites of I don't think it's as simple as pulling out 45% of Broomfield. Or we could just do that, right? So let's go for an RFP that includes all of the HOAs. It comes out to be $1. And then we say, okay, well, let's take 45% of that off. And then add 10% back in. And really you'd be looking at a cost savings of 30%. Right? But it would be napkin math and not RFP level math.
Well, I just say I was surprised at his answer that it's not it's not the increase in the increase in cost is not proportional to the decrease in volume of residents. That's what I was surprised at with his answer. Did Fort, and my question related to HOAs was, did Fort Collins include the HOAs?
HOAs are included in Fort Collins, but they're allowed to opt out. They already had the residential recycling ordinance in place for several years now. And now they're about to add the city contracted services. HOAs can opt out as long as they contract at a similar level of service, including the pay-as-you-throw, seasonal yard trimmings. And they built staffing in to help with compliance and working with the HOAs on contracting at that level.
Okay. Then D, can the HOAs opt out of the city contract as long as they contract for services equivalent to the city contract? Yes. Recycling ordinance, yes. And timing is, do I support a phased approach? No. And I think that phased approach would be confusing for everyone in the city to think that they're redoing their contracts everybody across the city has to redo contracts within a year of each other because of implementing one ordinance followed by universal collection. Just as much as I want to gain the diversion rate impact of that for a year, it's not worth all that confusion. So thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. Okay, so Broomfield has a drop-off location for yard waste. Please do not throw your yard waste in the trash. Okay, I agree with, right, so I agree with Councilor Lim on the feedback that we have heard from EcoCycle that it is skipping the homes on the same road that adds the cost, not the cost of skipping entire neighborhoods. That was pretty clear in that presentation, so I want to be really, like, I'm finding this getting a little mucky here because it was they showed that picture and it was when you skip 2 or 3 homes, that's when the price added up. So I don't think we can make that exact judgment call yet. So I have a question, I think. If a contractor would require additional multiple garbage trucks and multiple size trash cans to win the initial contract for all of Broomfield, how can we ensure that we can get competitive bids every 3 years and not have this become a monopoly? If we got this one person who comes out, gets all this in place for us, they go, oh, we'll make sure it's competitive because we'll just we'll go rebid it. But then that one entity, it seems like they would kind of have Broomfield. And that's to be determined.
Yes. I mean, again, from a staff perspective, as I look out, having a compliance person to watch the compliance person to ensure it doesn't become a monopoly is just, as long as the quality was there, the category of falling into a monopoly, that's the unintended consequences, right? I want a blanket approach. I want everybody to be treated the same. And here's what we're going to lay this out. And others may very well call that a monopoly. So it's
More of a concern of, quality and also cost. If all of a sudden they have it all and then they go, well, now we raise our rates. So I'm going to disagree with some of my council members up here who think there would never be a monopoly. I could see it happening. So there's at one point in time, there was a discussion about breaking Broomfield into districts, like maybe 3 districts. And then one trash provider could, service, I mean, not just say like Ward 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, separate. So you'd be, sections. And then we wouldn't be creating the monopoly, but is that idea gone?
I'm gonna clarify because I'm probably not understanding. Allison, did you have something to add on that last question?
A quick thing, a reminder that all of the haulers are still in play on the commercial side of things. So even though one hauler or a few haulers might have a residential contract for all of Broomfield or the outside HOAs, however it comes into play, there will still be competition in the commercial sector. And that's a lot of business for the haulers. So it keeps haulers around. And there have been cities that have switched haulers and haven't just gone with the same one at contract renewal.
So not being held hostage.
Right.
I shouldn't say that term anymore, but there you go. Councilmember Anderson, so am I understanding, so then we'd have possibly Broomfield broken into 3 different districts and then have a different RFP for each one of those different districts?
Do you want me to answer that? Yes, we were talking about a districting approach in the beginning. It's something that often happens when there are smaller haulers in play who might want to bid on a smaller section, not bid on the whole thing. That can still be done through the RFP process. However, we know the last at least 2, possibly 3 cities that took a districting approach didn't have anyone bid on a particular district. They only received bids for citywide. So.
Okay, so that option's off the table, pretty much. Okay, so I still have the significant concern about requiring our HOAs who already have the single hauler service and recycling service in place. And if we require them to do our minimum requirements, whatever that is, that we're forcing them into this situation. I understand the concerns, but we need everybody. But we have a Red Leaf HOA with 550 members can get a competitive price. So I'm still not sure about this, like that would really be that hard to get somebody to come in and competitively priced with a few different haulers. I'm still not in that camp. So I really do want to have our HOAs opt out. And if they did, they wouldn't be part of the RFP. So the HOA residents should not if the HOA opts out, they should not pay that fee because they're not part of the RFP. I'm not seeing why it's so hard to do a couple different RFPs. I understand maybe the providers are just like, I'm not gonna mess with that, but I just don't see why we can't have multiple people servicing Broomfield, full neighborhoods like all of Broadlands, all of Anthem. I don't see why somebody would turn that down. And I guess it's not surprising to me that, as someone representing a ward that's full of HOAs, majority of residents are HOAs, that I have this significant concern more than some others. And I hope staff follows through with the in-depth conversation with the HOA board, regardless of the feedback here, just to get their input and make sure we're not, I'm struggling with this one. So that's my feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll make this quick. If someone's putting a table together, ditto what Councilmember Lim said.
All right. Does that work? Are y'all tracking this? Oh, thank goodness. Okay, good. Anyone else? Councilmember Leslie, did you have any other input on the menu? The menu of others on page 17? I didn't want to miss anybody's input. Hold a second. You're like on your fourth or fifth.
I have nothing, Mayor.
You're good. Okay. Okay, it's you.
I had one question.
Okay.
Councilmember Anderson said, in the memo, it's talked about, we would either have the haulers provide the cans or we would have a lease option on them. Because we don't want to incur the cost of buying the cans. Is that my understanding? What the proposal is?
Allison, thank you. Should say Miss
Yes.
Harvey. I'm taking great liberties tonight. I apologize.
I'll answer anything. You made eye contact. No, it's fun. Yes, the cost of the carts has increased a lot recently. It's very expensive upfront cost to own them. And so the recommendation is either the haulers own them or there's a lease to buy option, which is what.
Would the
Fort
lease to
Collins
buy
does.
option be borne by the consumer?
Yes.
The reason I'm asking is because at the town hall, I was speaking to the gentleman from EcoCycle, who's also a Arvada City Council member. And he mentioned the fact that if the haulers have the cans, that gives them a competitive advantage the next time the next bidding process is, because they already have the cans. Whereas the city owns them or leases them, I guess, that puts all the rest of the haulers on an even playing field. Is that what we're seeing in other communities?
We have also heard that, and we have some questions about that. I think the counterbalance and the trade-off there is it's millions of dollars to buy enough bins. You're talking trash bins, recycling bins, maybe compost bins, need a place to store them. We need staff to wrangle that. So that fiscal note is gonna look like pennies to the dollar for the bin ownership option.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
And so the closing pieces, so staff is coming back in June for the 2023 budget amendment, which is going to include for public works about 54 new positions in order to get us to where we need to initially, right? So we're building out the 3-year plan, 5-year plan, 10-year plan. So 54 positions by 2025, just to do infrastructure with what we have right now, which is about a $6 million price tag. So we have to balance, right? Each one of these against the bigger obligations. So yeah, that I think, yeah, from a staff perspective, hearing that we do the trash cans, and let's just make that really clear that's a resounding no, that we don't want to be in the business of doing the trash cans.
All right, that's a good point. Anyone else for the good of the cause? Yes, Councilmember Lim.
I just had one comment. If this is our only input chance for the RFP, I would really like to see us and be able to give some kind of senior income aligned discount if we can work that in somehow. I mean, that's been our alignment with housing, property taxes and everything else. I'd like to see that in here somewhere.
This is not the last time on the RFP. Tonight was simply solidifying council's desire to either not travel down any path or choose the road less traveled, or combine them. And the choice is resounding path 3. So now we'll put some meat on it. We'll go back, we'll calculate, we'll get some additional conversations going with the HOAs. And we'll continue to walk down that 3. And then it will be like we do development discussions, right? We'll have a list of wants. And then we'll have to go through and scrub that list and determine the likelihood of that happening. So again, from a financial perspective, that would be an additional line item of subsidy. So less about the RFP, right? And more about subsidizing pockets of the population as we move down path 3. Ms. Brouillard, do you have anything else?
To clarify the direction of council tonight on these last decision points. So just to walk through what we heard. So for option 2, for A, the opt-out fee. So to implement a city contracted universal collection program with an opt-out fee for households that do not want to participate, is that acceptable? Yes. B, organics compost. Does council want staff to pursue curbside organics or compost as part of the bundled service in the city contract? Yes. Organics compost C question, since inclusion of curbside organics compost collection as a bundled service, i.e. included in cost of trash collection, might make the price too high. Do you want staff to explore alternative options? Yes. D, HOAs. Do we include HOAs in the city contract with an adequate compliance runway to allow them to join as their contracts expire? Yes. And I'm going to skip the second question and come back. E, recycling ordinance. Does council wish to require residential trash haulers to offer curbside composting as well as recycling, although it may increase costs? Yes. And then the last one is timing. So the two that we don't, first, let me pause there. Does that align? That's what we captured very quickly. Want to make sure no red flags with that. Okay. The two that we don't have clarity on, if we could just quickly do that, would be the second question around HOA. So it was yes, include them. The second question was, does council wish to allow an opt-out of the city contract as long as they have equivalent services? And I'll pause there if we could get clear direction on that one.
Say it again.
It's on so we have clear direction to include HOAs. What we don't know is if there should be an opt-out option of the city contract if they have equivalent services.
I think yes.
There was not consensus. Okay, yes?
I think there should be an opt-out. No, I'm going to decide it. Just kidding. I was just kidding. Okay.
All rules go tonight, you said, right?
No, I was trying to bring some levity. Gotcha. Okay, Todd, opt-out for HOAs. Danae, can you please?
Yeah, would you like an opt-out option for HOAs if they have equivalent services to the city contract?
No.
Henkel?
It's weird that we disagree on this one because we normally agree on a lot of things. I think yes.
Okay.
Anderson? Absolutely, yes.
Leslie?
No.
Jeff?
Ditto what Councilmember Lynn said.
She didn't say anything yet.
This one already. I was very thorough.
What did you say?
I said yes.
Okay, and that's a yes for Chef, and then Councilmember Wood.
No.
Okay. Doug,
No.
No.
no. So that is a no 5-4, but I would vote yes if it matters.
Great. And then Mayor, just one other is around the timing. So there was split on if we should do a phased approach or do it together. So if we could do one more straw poll, that would be
Sure, that was
appreciated.
fun. Okay. But it has to be phased or what?
Phased, or if we do them concurrently.
Or concurrently? Phased or concurrently, Cohen?
C for concurrently.
Okay, Henkel?
You're now confusing me. After some other input from city council members and communication, I think concurrently.
All right. Anderson?
I'm still stuck on the last question. So we're just gonna, I'm like, so are we just not even gonna, we're just gonna drop the whole question, just let the HOA thing, whole thing go at this point then? Was that the decision? Like, we're not even gonna seek input from the HOAs? I mean, I think Councilman Leslie might want to reconsider because it's
I
majority
think
of the
that's a
board.
mistake.
I think
do.
it's, I think we just, this is gonna hurt. I'm just gonna
Yeah,
say that I'm
I
I'm
agree.
opting out of this next question because I'm still stuck on the other one.
Okay. That's Councilmember Leslie, concurrent or phased?
I think that requires more conversation.
Okay,
Yeah, so I'm
you
gonna,
want to pass on that?
yeah.
Okay. Councilmember Shaw? What do you, Councilmember Lim?
Thank you. You answered this
He
one.
never cares how I vote. He does today. Concurrent. Okay, then that's you and Ward.
I know I'm gonna be outvoted, but I'm gonna say phased.
Okay. Doug, deal.
Concurrently.
Okay. Commissioner
Concurrently,
Street?
yeah.
Concurrently, okay, we got a consensus of concurrent. Anything else?
So, Ms. Brouillard, let's summarize one more time.
Yes, let me summarize the decision points. And I do want to address Councilmember Anderson's question because the reason we came here tonight was we received direction back in January about feedback with your residents and taking that moment to make sure that they were heard and engaged in the process. And it's really important that we continue to do that for any of this to be successful. And so the HOA outreach is a critical component that will happen. It was just something that we did with the management company preemptively to see, or proactively to see, I've been doing legislation too much, proactively to see what's going on. But we will do a full outreach and work with our HOA partners. We've worked with Red Leaf and stuff to explore what that looks like. So I did just want to provide the outreach will look different and will continue to grow now that we have additional direction tonight. And those directions were that yes, an opt-out fee to pursue organics through the city contract, to pursue compost and organics as part of a bundled service, and alternative options pending what the prices are. Around HOAs, we are going to include them in a city contract with adequate compliance runway to allow them to join as our contracts expire. So I want to make sure that's mentioned. And then the secondary question to that was, does council wish to allow HOAs to opt out? And the decision in the straw poll was no. Recycling ordinance, does council wish to require residential trash haulers to offer curbside composting as well as recycling, although this may increase costs? Yes. And then the timing was agreed to do it concurrently instead of phased.
All right, that sounds okay to everyone. I think we have a winner. Okay. Oh, Councilmember Anderson, sorry.
Okay, I'm still confused then. So why are we gonna engage the HOAs if we've already said they're gonna opt them out? Like they have no, I mean, not opt them out, that they have no choice. This is going to, everyone's going, if I'm understanding correctly on that question, HOAs are no longer separate. Everyone is going to be part of the exact same city contract. So why even bother engaging the HOAs at this point? Because like I'm missing out, and I know our Mayor Pro Tem would have probably had an input here. And so we've just decided we're gonna leave them out. I mean, I don't understand. What are we going to engage them on? I'm very confused. We're kind of split here and we're just not.
So we as in council decided to move in that direction. So staff is following that lead. So the communication will continue to be all of those points that Ms. Brouillard just indicated. I'm assuming that the HOA feedback that council is going to get based on that direction will be super interesting for you all.
Well, I think it's
See
going to
if-
be, when you think about it, it is split. Half our community lives in HOAs and most of them are pretty satisfied with their situation. So yeah, that's going to be a difficult thing to overcome. And I know you guys aren't impacted by that, but it will impact half the community. So, you know,
Mayor.
but who?
If I could just add, I mean, this is still in the
Oh.
exploratory phase,
Mhm.
so we don't know what they'll come back with in reaction. I would note, I hope it includes to HOAs, that if we adopt universal housing, we may, or trash collection, we may get a really good rate. The HOAs, if they opt out, have to then pay an extra fee. So their rates will go up if they opt out. So that's sort of the issue, the crux of the issue that I have to decide. If they're included, they could be included in a much lower price. They might even benefit or at least come out even. But I think this is what we're going now is we're going to go out to the HOAs and the entire residency and we'll get response. But I think we're not at a final stage right now. We're just in the next
Actually,
stage of
this-
exploration.
Not really. This is the decision point. This is
Well,
where,
they're going to pursue that, right? And then we'll have to make a decision.
no, you just made the decision.
Mayor, if I may.
No,
Well,
I'm not done. Really. I mean, if you say we're going to force the HOAs into this, then that's the direction. We're not, this is the exploration. So there won't be another time to change your mind, is my point.
So
Mayor, if I may.
Yes.
I mean, I disagree with that because we will have a vote, we'll have a public hearing and a vote of this at some point. So we can argue at that point for another 2 or 3 hours. And people can make points. So I mean, this could be, we can undo this if council decided
Why
they
not
want
do it
to.
right the first time then?
I would say we did.
I disagree.
The straw poll was 5-4. It's
I-
not Stan, it's Stan's fault. He's not here.
I know
So,
how Stan would have voted.
but he's not here.
I know. Stan would have said, leave the HOAs out of it. I'll text him. I'll get his guidance. This isn't a vote. It's a straw poll. It's not, we're not doing anything legislative. I mean, it's. Okay. All right. So are we done?
great job.
Thanks, y'all. All right, our next agenda item this evening is a study session and request for direction related to the Energy Conservation Code. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, and I'll ask our staff to begin the discussion.
Thank you, Mayor. And joining us this evening is Anna Burtonzetti. Just got to do just a quick shout out. Anna was working on Senate Bill 213. She led another conversation with the governor's office today. Had feedback from folks in the governor's office. Danae and I both said, don't even contemplate for 1 second thinking that you could offer her to take her away from us on all her great planning. So fortunate to have you, Anna. We certainly appreciate it. And with that, please introduce us to the Energy Code Roadmap.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, City Council. Anna Burtonzetti, Planning Director, Co-Director for Community Development. I'm also joined this evening with Tim Pate. He is Broomfield's Chief Building Official. Next slide, please. I'm going to try and be a little brief. I know you've had a long evening. Our staff memorandum, as well as the summary slide, provides the background for how conserving energy through development standards for new construction helps to work towards Brimfield's goals regarding greenhouse gas reduction. I'm sorry, emission reduction. In short, buildings are responsible for about 40% of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. And so reducing emissions from buildings could therefore help to reduce greenhouse gas emissions for Brimfield. Earlier this year, Brimfield took one of the steps forward for more efficient building requirements through the adoption of the 2021 code package. This includes the 2021 Energy Code. Tonight, we're seeking additional direction from City Council regarding possible next steps in the energy conservation related to building construction. Next slide, please. In addition to moving to the most current IECC, the Energy Code, some municipalities have adopted local strengthening amendments to that Energy Code. The Energy Code strengthening amendments have been considered and adopted by other local jurisdictions. Some of them include Louisville, Boulder County, and Erie. Generally, the strengthening amendments have focused on electrification requirements to either require electric-only construction, electric preferred, or sometimes called electric transition, or electric-ready construction requirements. Staff provided additional detail in the memo regarding the other communities that have adopted some of these various levels of strengthening amendments. Next slide, please. As various communities are adopting these local amendments, it is creating differences in requirements from city to city. In an effort to better regional collaboration, the Northwest Denver metro area and Boulder County worked together in 2021 and 2022 to review practices and come up with recommendations with the idea that regional communities adopt similar codes to help provide region-wide consistency. Staff provided a table in the memo with recommendations of this code cohort in regard to the 5 key topic areas identified, which are on the screen. They are energy code adoption, solar ready construction, electric vehicle ready construction, electric ready or electric preferred and electric preferred, and efficiency amendments. Next slide, please. In 2022, House Bill 221362 was adopted, which was intending to update the minimum energy code requirements for the state of Colorado. The bill requires creation of a state energy code board to finalize a model electric ready and solar ready code. This code will be completed this year in June. Tim Pate, as I mentioned, Chief Building Official for Broomfield, was appointed to this board and is very knowledgeable about the drafted code as it currently stands, as it's being brought forward. A draft of the code was linked in the memorandum. Once this code is finalized, cities and counties throughout Colorado will need to adopt this model code when they're updating their building codes. Next slide, please. So I think one of the requirements that was coming out of the code cohort was that Broomfield moved towards the adoption of the 2021 energy code, which we have done. And they also recommended moving towards the model energy code that is, as I mentioned, being finalized in June of this year. We anticipate that this could be adopted by City Council as soon as late this summer, pending direction this evening. And then the recommendations from the code cohort, as I mentioned, recommend local amendments as well. Next slide, please. In the staff memorandum, staff provided some links to available information regarding costs associated with, as I mentioned, what the code cohort is recommending, as well as the state energy code. Much of the data available relates to the residential construction, and we acknowledge that there are costs associated with these construction requirements as proposed either through local amendments, through moving to the 2021 code, as we previously talked about when that was adopted, and also will be with the state energy code as well. There will also be financial savings from efficiency, but the savings may take years to recoup from the initial upfront costs. Although there's not available information regarding the costs associated specifically with the state model code, we believe in our estimate that the cost will be somewhere around $6,500 per residential unit. And in this case, we're talking single family or townhome unit. This includes the electric vehicle requirements, solar ready requirements, and electric ready requirements that are currently required by the bill and in the draft. This, as I mentioned, is a very rough estimate. We also noted in the memo that with the electric preferred code specifically, there may be administrative impacts for Broomfield due to the complexities, in administering the codes. Other municipalities that have these requirements have added staff to help administer the codes. This is not an issue with electric only or electric ready codes, which are much simpler to administer. If Broomfield were to consider electric preferred, we would need to do additional analysis and discussion with some of these other cities that use the electric preferred amendments to see how this could potentially impact Broomfield staff and staffing levels, I mean. Next slide, please. Based on all of this information, what's come out of the code cohort, what is currently being considered with the state model energy code, Broomfield's recent adoption with the 2021, based on all that information, as well as the financial considerations, staff is bringing forward the roadmap that's on the screen with a phased approach towards further strengthening of the energy code. The first phase, as I mentioned, is completed. That was the adoption of the 2021 energy code. The second phase would be moving to the state energy code. This could be done, as I mentioned, as soon as late summer, and we'll have the final code in June. This would address electric ready, solar ready, and electric vehicle ready for all new construction. The final phase, if directed by council, would be further consideration of local amendments for all new construction beyond what's in the state energy code. So this could be electric preferred or electric only. The phased approach ensures staff responsible for the reviews and the development community as well have time to become familiar with the requirements to ensure streamlined administration of the modified code requirements and allow the development community to adapt and move forward with each change to the requirements. Next slide, please. Staff brought this roadmap to ACES for their input and recommendation, and their recommendation was to move forward as quickly as possible with the state model energy code and to follow it quickly with the local amendments. And their direction was before the end of 2024. Meeting this recommended timeframe would be highly challenging. City council agenda availability is limited in the fall due to the need for discussion and consideration of the budget, as well as adjustments to city council's meeting availability due to elections and holidays in November and December. ACES also desired to have more analysis compiled by staff to be made available for city council as part of the consideration of the amendments, and that analysis will take time. I should note the analysis that they're requesting staff does not have the capability to do in-house. We'll be looking at to find available resources, other research that we can use to provide to city council from other resources. To ensure adequate time for public engagement on a proposed local amendment and additional time for staff to evaluate potential fiscal impacts on the administration of electric preferred or electric transition code, staff anticipates consideration of local amendments, if directed by city council, to be early 2024 at the very earliest. That's just our estimate based on what we believe will be the time necessary to prepare. Next slide, please. With all of that in mind, we only have 2 questions for you this evening. Does the city council support moving forward with consideration of the state model energy code as soon as possible following finalization of that code in June? And as I mentioned, so that would be moving towards an ordinance consideration probably around late summer. And the second is, does the city council direct staff to bring back local strengthening amendments to require electric transition code requirements following adoption of the state model energy code? And with that, I will conclude our presentation. As I mentioned, Tim Pate is here this evening if you have specific questions that dive into the details of the state model energy code or really any of the energy codes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Burton-Zetti. We'll go to council comments and questions, starting with Council Member Schaaf and then Marshall.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you to staff for this great memo. It answered a lot of my questions, and I feel like instead of geeking out tonight, I can follow up and ask some of the more questions that don't necessarily have to do with these 2 questions. So I'll make it easy for both of these. Yes. That's all I have, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Marshall.
Thank you, Mayor. I do have a couple of questions. On the charts on page 9 and 10 regarding the energy savings of the different options, I noticed that on multifamily building and on commercial building, both of those, the cost and the cost went down between electric preferred and all electric. But on single family, the cost went up slightly between those 2. Can you explain why that went up and not down? So on multifamily, it's $1342, the annual cost for electric preferred, $1291 all electric. So that went down. Same thing with commercial, but on single family, it went from 2082 to 2026. So it went up. So
Councilmember, what slide is that? I'm sorry.
page 9 and 10 of the memo.
Oh, it's in the memo. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, council member. I think we'd really have to dive pretty deep. The research was done. I think that's the research that was done by Lotus Group for Eagle County. So we were providing the chart that they had presented the information in.
Gotcha. That makes sense. I did want to point out that the single family, even with a slightly higher cost of all electric, the emissions reduction was 89%. So that's dramatic, and that's something I think we should pursue. So one of the things in the memo you talked about was the outreach to builders. What is that gonna, I mean, a couple questions on that. What is it gonna look like? And is extensive outreach necessary on this issue? And for the reason I'm saying that is because the builders know this is coming. I mean, everybody, all those, our surrounding communities have been doing it. We've been talking about it for a while. This isn't gonna come as a surprise to them. I understand a phased, whatever we do, we phase it, but the fact that we're gonna do it, it shouldn't be a surprise to them.
Councilmember, I think especially in regard to the state model energy code, I agree, it should not come as a surprise. It's going to be brought forward multiple communities throughout the state. However, both Tim and I think we might be one of the first to move to it. And so for that reason, we really believe that some communication regarding what is in the state model energy code, how this came about from the state through the Energy Code Board is important. It's also, we believe, pretty critical to start communicating that early. So usually what we've done with code updates is we provide email blasts directly to those in our context lists. We've hosted open houses just to make sure that we invite those with active projects or interested in development an opportunity to come in and talk to our staff, especially Tim, to start talking about the details of what's in the code and how their building plans might have to be adapted, and get some feedback. We want to be able to answer their questions regarding how I expect a lot of questions about what happens with electric vehicle requirements for those with site development plans with specific requirements, if it's now going to be different based on the state requirements. I think they're going to go up in most instances, but we want to make sure that that communication is very clear so that those builders, as they're starting to work on their final construction plans, they're taking all of that into consideration. It's also one of the reasons, in addition to having that communication, we're looking usually at a longer effective date for the ordinance, like we did for the model energy code, to make sure that we give those in the pipeline some time to adapt their plans.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you right, we'll be one of the first areas to do the models energy code, but other communities have already done strengthening amendments. So we would not be the first. Okay.
We would not be the first, but similarly, we would want to start that communication early. Same reasons.
Okay, I think that's the only questions I had right now. On the two requests for feedback, yes. On the first one, yes, I think we should go forward with the energy code. Yes, I want the strengthening amendments. I'm assuming that it would be a study session to determine what's going to be in those before we actually bring them to an ordinance, right?
Councilmember, I believe that's probably the best practice. I think what our plan was moving forward based on the feedback from ACES, since they were looking for some additional information, was to first bring that information back to ACES, make sure we were addressing what they had anticipated, then have a study session similar to this prior to the ordinance.
Okay. The only thing I would like to, I understand the staffing issues, but I would like to see this move more quickly, strengthening amendments, than if it would be possible to have ordinances ready to vote on by first quarter, that would be my preference, but I understand that there might be staffing issues or workload that might make that difficult, so.
Definitely my target to do first quarter, and I'm kind of hedging a little only because of that land use bill and what might be coming out of it. So I'm trying to keep everything a little bit squishy for myself, but yes, that is our target.
Okay, that's all.
We do not speak of this tonight.
That's it, man. Thank you.
Oh, who was next? Oh, you, Councilmember Ward, sorry.
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Burton City, I just have one quick question on question number 2. When we say require electric transition code requirements, are we specifically looking at allowing either all electric or a mixture, or are we defining it in some other definition than what's already in the packet?
So electric transition, it would be the electric preferred option. So it could be electric only, that could be their choice, or electric ready with additional conservation measures.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So to answer the questions, because I do not have any other questions as it relates to the packet. Yes, for question number 1, I would rather for question number 2 see it be all electric code requirements and not do the transition electric preferred code. But that's just my personal opinion. I'm interested to see how my colleagues go.
Thank you. Councilmember Hinkle.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for the presentation and, the thought process and all of this, especially as the state moves forward, which is good. I also did think about the land use bill and all of this, and I thought, oh, okay, do we even have control over this? Should we just throw out all of our ordinances? Yeah, I'm a little depressed. So, on the first part where it says, does city council support moving forward? Obvious, I think, yes. The second part, I just had the question about being, we can't really decide quite yet on electric only, and electric preferred. What sort of stakeholders will be a part of that? Because I'm just curious as to local grid capacity, those sorts of things. What sort of stakeholders will we be looking at if we do say yes to that?
That's a good point. If we were going to electric only, we would definitely want to make sure that we were doing additional proactive reach out with United Power and Excel, if that was the direction. Electric preferred, I think, as was already mentioned, a lot of the communities have already moved to that. We have a good understanding of that, as do they. But I think we would want to make sure that if the direction coming out of tonight was to bring back a study session with those two options for further consideration, we would need to do more engagement with the development community as well as the utility providers. And I want to also mention this would impact residents as well, doing changes or building. So we would want to make sure that there was opportunities for engagement with residents as well.
Definitely. Yeah, our gas stove went out and we thought, oh, let's go get electric. Well, we already have all these freaking huge solar panels. We had paid zero in electric bills now, which is great. But now we would need to pay an extra $2,000 to get a whole new electric panel on our house for a new electric stove. That's going to cost us probably another $2,000. So it's those considerations when we take into account, like you said, the residents. So I just want to keep our stakeholders in mind, but yes, on number 2 as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Lim.
Yes to both questions. And the second question, I think, the timing. So ACE, I want to honor what ACE's request was. So their request was that council, how was that worded? That they consider, that council consider a local amendment should be considered by city council before 2024. The word consider, I'm not sure, definite in our process. So would you, did that mean bring forth a study session before the end of 24, or did it mean bring forth an ordinance before 24? What did that mean to you?
Councilmember Lim, when I was at the meeting, I really felt like they wanted the final consideration, and they were expecting or anticipating it would be the ordinance. But definitely appreciate the thought about whether that could be met in terms of whether a study session is brought back sooner.
Well, so that, I mean, is it still impossible in your mind, from your staffing perspective, to bring a study session forward before 2024, but bring the ordinances forward in 24?
We could definitely look at that option. I wouldn't be able to commit to it this evening just
Okay.
because I'm not sure about the availability of the meeting space, as well as I mentioned, all the other things moving around in the universe right now, but we could definitely look at that.
Okay, that would just be my question. And then I guess if we have to wait with this, if we have to wait till the study session until the beginning of 24, then I guess I would follow up on their request too, to say if we have the study session in the beginning of 24, what's the time frame for the ordinances? Can you anticipate that? Is it 9 months after the study session? I'm looking at the possibility, when is the stakeholding process happening? How long is it going to take? And are we actually then, if we're not starting till the beginning of 24, are we not looking at ordinance passing till 25?
that would not be my intent, clearly, just to get that out there. What, in my mind, the schedule would lay out is that engagement would begin around the end of 2023. We want to make sure that it's not confused with the move to the state energy code and that there's no confusion. So we want to make sure there's a clear start to that state energy code. I think we threw out the date of October 1st as a potential, or January 1st, whatever the direction was, city council, but October 1st would be the earliest that we would consider that. And then moving towards, we could start some public engagement near the end of the year, bring it back to ACES, whether that occurred in December or early January with an immediate turnaround, kind of like we did this one, to city council. So I'm thinking definitely within the first half of 2024 is realistic. I'm a little nervous to fully commit to anything too fast, but that is definitely where I was headed.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So Councilmember Lim, not to be the doom and gloom, after Anna says yes, we can probably make it happen. We don't have any study sessions in November. We don't have any study sessions in December. We're going to have a huge conversation, and huge, not as in lengthy, but as in critically important, September, October. That's all about the budget. And the implications of the wastewater master plan and how that impacts the budget along with all of these other FTEs. So the council calendar is full of really critical pieces that staff is already beginning to work on from a scheduling perspective. So I would say it's going to be in January 2024.
Okay, at least I'm optimistic. I feel better that there is some indication, no commitment, that it's not going to be spread out all through the year of 24 until we would possibly pass these electric preferred ordinances.
I think Mr. Pate is, and I'm trying to think of a really great question to ask Mr. Pate, because we're so grateful of all of his board work down at the state and he's representing us so well. Yes, first quarter 2024.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Anderson.
Okay, so I say yes, appreciate Councilmember Lim's questions on the timing and ditto the request for the stakeholder engagement. Thank you.
Councilmember Cohen.
Just a quick question. I'm curious in the state work on the model code, et cetera. Is there anything included to help people pay the costs, for instance, of heating with electricity, which is substantially higher? That's the one concern about moving too fast with this, is the costs are going to be impressive.
That's a great question. So in my numerous meetings, I think 14 so far on the Energy Code Board, working with the language that's just about ready over the next 3 weeks, there was really nothing presented from the Colorado Energy Office for cost impacts. There were a lot of comments and questions from the public and from other board members. There's 21 board members on that potential of being electric ready and EV ready as to what that impact's going to be. So we don't have, the CEO does not have, none of the board members have been provided that cost. Now, I did some quick cost impact for just the construction cost, but not, this is brand new, so there isn't anything out there, and it's going to get started adopting by jurisdictions over the next, they have 3 years to get it adopted. So we don't have that answer. It will be an impact, no doubt. Don't know how much.
I don't have it in front of me, but I think the cost of heating a home fully electric versus gas is 4 to 5 times more, which is not as significant in apartments because they're smaller units and they're in shared walls, but for freestanding single homes could be significant. I'm just saying it's something that we don't want to rush too quickly because the impacts, the financial impacts are great. It's the juxtaposition with, yes, the greenhouse gas impact would be immense as well, but there's a significant cost to it that we need to be prepared. It's the electrical cars, you can go a lot more miles for less money with electrical car, but the opposite is true when you're heating a home with electric. And I think we just need to be careful.
Sure.
I had a meeting yesterday with Iffy Jones, the Excel area manager, Councilmember Cohen, and we talked about exactly that. So the expediency with which communities want to transition, whether it's to full electric or have an expedited process to electric. Yet at the same time, we're having these conversations about how difficult it is for folks to see an 18% increase. And a significant portion of that increase is to build up their new grids to accommodate all of the electric. So again, it's the unintended consequences of having one priority about reducing GHGs on the other flip side until it's fully translated, right? Coal is cheaper. Between the solar grids and the geothermal, she talked a lot about that, but exactly to your point that it's going to be more expensive before it gets less expensive because of the pressure on the grid. She didn't mention any subsidies at all whatsoever to whether it be residents outside of the state. Mr. Pate, is it the LEAP program for the energy assistance program?
Yes.
It's very low income qualified, very super low. So we're still doing first round. I'll get back to you. Delgadillo, council member.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes and yes.
All right. Any other first round feedback? We have 1, 2, 3, 4. Somebody's missing. Oh, Councilmember Leslie, thank you.
Yeah, yes and yes.
Okay, got that. Thank you. And that's 9. Yes, so second round. Thank you. Councilmember Lim.
CC4CA just had a seminar last week. So the Colorado Energy Office is going to release in 2023 high efficiency electric heating and appliances grant program. It was authorized by HB 22-1362 on energy code. And it's to support the community efforts to help swap in high efficiency electric heat and appliances. And eligible applicants include local governments, higher education, utilities, nonprofits, housing developers, businesses. So there is that program that would help with any impact for people with income aligned problems. There's going to be a public building electrification grant that from the Colorado Energy Office that hit me with, what about our library that's interested in if it gets expanded in going electric? And it's scheduled for launch in May of 23. So that's soon. So those are 2 of the statewide programs that are coming forward that I had just heard about that might be able to address some of those cost impacts for at least some of the population.
Thank you. Councilmember Marshall.
Thank you, Mayor. One question on going off of that. Do we know, have we seen any guidance on when the federal Inflation Reduction Act money's going to be released? Because I know it's going to be administered by the state, but those are direct grants, rebates to consumers for purchasing electric HVACs and hot water tanks and dryers and stoves and stuff.
Sorry, neither of us has that information. Not sure if anyone else.
I know the state website says it's waiting on the feds for the guidance, so, but it's presumably this year. I did want to follow up on guidance for number 2, because wasn't quite clear in what I was saying. When I asked about the study session, I do believe that we should move to electrification, all electric, and not just electric preferred. I do believe that most of the stakeholder and consumer impacts that will be there can be addressed adequately in a phased approach. I don't think we should just do it starting tomorrow, but over a period of years implementing it. So I do think that's the way we should be going ultimately. I do understand the cost but I think the phased approach would help with that. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other final comments, questions from council? Councilmember Leslie, just checking. You
I'm
good?
fine. Yep.
Okay. Well, do you have the direction that you need, Ms. Bertzetti and Mr. Pate?
Thank you. Yes, we have very clear direction. I appreciate it. And we'll be back with a study session probably sometime early next year. And we will be bringing out the state model energy code, and we'll see if we are one of the first to adopt it. or
Wonderful.
Consider adoption of it.
Consider adoption. Wonderful. Thank you all so much for hanging with us tonight. That concludes the items on tonight's study session agenda. There being no further business, the study session is adjourned. Thank you.